Cardboard. Sisyphus would have hated cardboard. Every box I emptied just seemed to reveal 3 more. The apartment smelled of stale paint and the ghost of someone else's curry. Outside, the city roared, a constant, grinding noise that promised nothing but more noise tomorrow. I hated it. I hated the job I moved here for, I hated the traffic, and most of all, I hated this beige box they called Apartment 4A. I shoved another stack of books onto a shelf, my back screaming in protest. Just get it done, John. Just get it done and you can order a pizza and drink yourself to sleep. That's when I heard it. Tap. A pause. Tap. Tap. It came from the wall I shared with 4B. A quick, light, deliberate sound. 3 distinct knocks. I stopped, a paperback copy of some thriller I'd never read halfway to the shelf. I listened. The building groaned. A siren wailed in the distance. Nothing. Old pipes, I mumbled, my own voice sounding loud in the quiet room. Cheap building settling. I'd gotten a deal on this place, after all. You get what you pay for. I shoved the book onto the shelf and grabbed another box, the crinkle of packing paper filling the silence. I wasn't going to let every little creak in the shoebox get to me. I had work to do. A few hours later, the boxes were mostly gone, replaced by messy piles of my life scattered across the floor. Progress. My stomach growled, a low, guttural complaint that pizza couldn't fix soon enough. The trash was overflowing. I gathered the thin plastic bag, which immediately threatened to split. One more trip. I yanked open the apartment door and stepped into the hallway. And I stopped. On my welcome mat, the one that said "Go away" in what was supposed to be a funny font, sat a single blueberry muffin. It was on a folded paper napkin, still radiating a faint warmth I could feel in the air around it. Tucked under its side was a small folded piece of paper. I looked up and down the hallway. It was empty. The paint was peeling near the ceiling, and the fluorescent light hummed, casting a sickly yellow glow on everything. I nudged the muffin with my shoe. It was real. I crouched down, the trash bag crinkling beside me. I picked up the note. It was written in a neat, looping cursive, the kind of handwriting no one has anymore. Welcome, neighbor, from 4B. A muffin, from apartment 4B, the source of the taps. The gesture was so normal, so unexpectedly kind. It cut through the grit of the city and the frustration of the move. A small smile touched my lips. Maybe this place wouldn't be so bad. Maybe people were actually decent here. For a moment, the loneliness that had been clinging to me like a wet coat felt a little less heavy. It felt strange, but good. Holding the muffin in one hand and the note in the other, I left the trash bag by my door. I had to say thank you. It was the right thing to do. I walked the 5 steps to the door of 4B. It was identical to mine, a slab of cheap wood painted the same depressing beige, with a brass 4B screwed into it. I took a breath and knocked. The sound was solid, echoing slightly in the quiet hall. I waited. I could hear the hum of the hallway light, the distant rumble of a truck on the street below. Nothing else. No television, no music, no footsteps approaching the door. Okay, maybe they were in the shower. I knocked again, a little louder this time. Hello? Silence. This was awkward. They had to be home. The muffin was still warm. I leaned in, putting my ear against the cool wood of the door. I held my breath, trying to catch the faintest sound of life from within. Nothing. Not a whisper, not a creak of a floorboard. It was the kind of total silence you get from an empty room. I pulled back, a flicker of confusion starting to burn in my gut. This didn't make sense. Maybe they were wearing headphones? I reached for the doorknob just to test it. I wasn't going to open it, of course. Just see. My fingers closed around the brass knob. It was cold. Not just cool to the touch, but a deep, inert cold. And it was dusty. A thin, gray film of dust covered the entire knob, clinging to my fingertips when I pulled my hand back. The kind of dust that takes weeks, maybe months, to accumulate. The kind of dust that says, no one has touched this in a very long time. I stared at my grimy fingers. I looked at the warm muffin in my other hand. My brain tried to connect the 2 facts and failed. An electric jolt shot up my spine. A feeling, prickles on the back of my neck. The sudden, certain knowledge that I was being watched. I spun around. The hallway was empty. The peeling paint. The humming light. The closed doors of 4C and 4D at the far end. Nothing had changed, but the feeling was still there, a physical pressure in the air. Someone had seen me. I felt their eyes on me right now. I looked at the dark space under the stairwell. I peered down the long stretch to the elevator. Empty. But it didn't feel empty. My heart started to pound. A low, heavy drumming against my ribs. This was stupid. I was letting the move get to me. I was tired, hungry, and letting my imagination run away. But I couldn't shake the dust on my fingers, or the cold of that doorknob. I backed away from 4B, my eyes scanning the hallway, the closed doors, the shadows. I snatched my trash bag, fumbled with my keys, and practically threw myself back inside my apartment. The deadbolt made a loud, satisfying thunk as I shot it home. I leaned against the door, my breathing coming in short, sharp bursts. Okay, calm down. Just calm down, John. I walked into the kitchen, the muffin still clutched in my hand like a talisman. I set it down on the kitchen counter next to the note. I needed to think. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the previous tenant of 4B left it. No, the note said neighbor. Maybe it was from another apartment, and they got the number wrong. It could be 3B or 5B. That made sense. A simple mistake. But the tapping. The 3 distinct taps from that shared wall. I stood there, frozen in the middle of my own kitchen, just listening. The apartment was silent now. I was straining my ears, trying to hear anything from next door. A cough, a footstep, a TV, anything to prove there was a person in there. The silence was absolute. Then I heard it. It wasn't a sound from next door. It wasn't from the hallway. It was right here. In the room with me. A whisper. So quiet it was almost just a puff of air. So close I felt it brush against the shell of my ear. Was it good? Ice flooded my veins. Every muscle in my body went rigid. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A confirmation. I didn't think. I reacted. I spun around with a strangled yell, my fists coming up, ready to fight. No one. There was no one there. The living room was exactly as I'd left it. A chaotic landscape of half-unpacked belongings. The front door was still locked. The windows were closed. I was alone. Completely alone. My heart was a wild animal trying to beat its way out of my chest. My eyes darted everywhere, into every shadow, every corner. Nothing. It was impossible. I heard it. I felt it. I must be losing my mind. Stress. Lack of sleep. That had to be it. I was cracking up. I laughed. A short, sharp, terrified sound. Jesus Christ, John. I turned back to the kitchen counter, needing to see something solid, something real, something to prove I wasn't going crazy. My eyes fell on the spot where I had placed the offering from 4B. The note was still there, a small white rectangle on the gray laminate. But the muffin was gone. Sleep didn't come. How could it? My brain was a broken record, stuck on a single, impossible loop. The muffin. The note. The cold, dusty doorknob. The whisper. The empty counter. Over and over. I stared at the ceiling, a cracked landscape, in the thin city light, bleeding through the blinds. The apartment groaned around me. Old pipes, I told myself again. The building settling. But the words were hollow. They didn't work anymore. I tried to piece it together with logic. My logic. The only thing I had left. Okay. I was tired. I was stressed. I was hungry. Maybe I came inside, put the muffin down, and then, in a haze of unpacking exhaustion, I ate it. Just scarfed it down without thinking. It was possible. People did mindless things when they were worn out. It explained the missing muffin. It was a neat, clean explanation. But it didn't explain the whisper. It didn't explain the voice I felt on my ear. Was it good? And it sure as hell didn't explain the dust. The thick, settled, undisturbed dust on the doorknob of 4B. A car alarm started screaming 6 stories below. I didn't even flinch. It was just part of the city's symphony. A normal sound. I craved normal sounds. I closed my eyes and focused on the noise, trying to let it wash over the crawling feeling under my skin. It was just a weird first night, that's all. Tomorrow, I'd go to this job I already hated, I'd drink bad office coffee, and everything would feel normal again. It had to. I repeated that to myself a few more times until the words lost all meaning and the car alarm finally went quiet, leaving a silence that felt 100 times louder. Eventually, sometime before the sun came up, exhaustion won a battle of attrition, and I slipped into a thin, dreamless sleep. The next day was a blur of forced normalcy. I navigated the subway, sat in orientation meetings, and filled out paperwork. I smiled at people whose names I immediately forgot. I drank the bad coffee. I tried to focus on the million little tasks that come with starting a new life. But every quiet moment, my mind snapped back to apartment 4B. To the note. To the dust. By the time I walked out of the office building at 5:30, a headache was pounding behind my eyes. The walk home felt long. Each step toward the apartment building felt heavier than the last. I saw him as I was coming through the main lobby. He was wrestling with a huge, overflowing garbage can near the mailboxes. He was an older guy, maybe late 50s, with a tired-looking face, a thin film of sweat on his brow, and a janitor's uniform that had seen better decades. A name tag hanging crookedly from his shirt pocket read, Henderson, the building manager. Perfect. Excuse me, I said, my voice a little too loud. He grunted, finally shoving the can into a service closet. He wiped his hands on his pants and turned to me. Yeah? Hi, I'm John. Just moved into 4A. I stuck out a hand. He stared at it for a second before giving it a quick, limp shake. His hand was greasy. Henderson. Welcome to the building, he said, his tone flat. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Thanks. Hey, quick question for you. My neighbor in 4B, do you happen to know if they're around? I wanted to thank them for the welcome gift, but they didn't answer the door last night. I tried to make it sound casual, just a friendly guy making friendly chat. Henderson's tired eyes narrowed. He stopped looking past me and focused right on my face. It was an unnerving, clinical stare, like a mechanic listening for a specific engine knock. 4B? He repeated, his voice slow. Yeah, apartment 4B, right next to me. He let out a short, sharp puff of air that wasn't quite a laugh. Kid, 4B has been empty for almost a year. Landlord's been trying to rent it out for ages. Something about the paperwork is a mess. He shook his head. Nobody's lived in that unit since last winter. The air in my lungs turned to ice. My throat went tight. The floor seemed to tilt just a little. No, that can't be right, I said, my voice thin. Someone was there last night. They left a muffin on my doormat. A blueberry muffin. There was a note. It said, Welcome neighbor, from 4B. I was rambling, showing him the evidence with my hands, tracing the shape of the muffin in the air like a crazy person. Henderson's expression didn't change. It was a look of weary pity. He'd seen it all. Leaky pipes, broken elevators, and now, the new guy losing his mind. He took a step closer and put a heavy hand on my shoulder. The fabric of his uniform smelled like motor oil and stale cigarettes. Listen, son, he said, his voice dropping into a softer, more patronizing tone. Moving is a bitch, especially to a city like this. It messes with your head. You're probably just exhausted. Seeing things, hearing things, happens. I'm not seeing things, I insisted, my voice getting louder. The muffin was warm. There was a note. I'm not crazy. He gave my shoulder a little squeeze. It wasn't comforting. It was dismissive. Okay, kid, okay. But I'm telling you, that apartment's empty. Deadbolted from the inside by me a month ago after the last showing. I got the only key. Nobody's been in there. He started to back away, eager to end the conversation. Look, the only other people on your floor are an old fella in 4C who's deaf as a post and a nursing student in 4D who's never home. You're the only new blood we've had in this place for a while. He gave me a final thin-lipped smile. Get some sleep. You'll feel better tomorrow. He turned and shuffled down the hall toward the back exit, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the lobby. The fluorescent lights hummed. The smell of garbage lingered in the air. His words echoed in my head. Empty for almost a year. Nobody's lived in that unit. I got the only key, my carefully constructed dam of logic, shattered into a million pieces. The muffin wasn't a mistake. The whisper wasn't my imagination. Henderson wasn't lying. He was the manager. He would know. So what did that mean? A ghost? A squatter who was a master of stealth and a baker of fine pastries? The questions swirled in my head, a nauseating vortex of impossibility. I felt a profound sense of isolation wash over me. Henderson hadn't just told me the apartment was empty. He had told me I was alone, utterly, completely alone with whatever was happening on the 4th floor. I took the stairs. I couldn't face the tight confines of the elevator. My footsteps echoed on the concrete. When I reached my floor, the hallway felt different. Hostile. The door to 4B looked like a tombstone. I stared at the brass numbers, glinting under the sickly light. I could almost feel the coldness of the doorknob from here. I fumbled for my own keys, my hand shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get the key in the lock. Inside, I shot the deadbolt. The thunk was loud, final. But it didn't make me feel safe. It made me feel trapped. I didn't turn on the lights. I stood in the growing darkness, just listening, straining my ears for any sound from the other side of the wall. The shared wall. Silence. A heavy, waiting silence. I went through the motions of making dinner, but I couldn't eat. Every bite tasted like cardboard. I was a wire, stretched taut, vibrating with a fear I couldn't name. And then I heard it. It started so softly I thought I was imagining it. A melody, faint and delicate. It was classical music, a piano. The notes were clear, precise, rising and falling with a sad, elegant grace. It was coming from the wall. It was coming from 4B. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was proof. Henderson was wrong. Someone was in there. I scrambled for my phone, my fingers slipping on the screen. I pulled up the voice recorder app. My hands were shaking, but I managed to hit the red button. A timer started counting up. 0:01, 0:02. I crept toward the wall, holding my breath. I pressed the bottom of the phone where the microphone was, flat against the cheap drywall. The music was louder here, seeping through the paint and plaster. A beautiful, haunting melody played by a ghost in an empty room. I stood there, frozen, for a full minute, letting the phone record. My mind screamed, "I've got you now. I've got proof. I'm not crazy." The music swirled around me, elegant and terrifying. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The last note hung in the air for a second before fading into absolute silence. My own breathing sounded like a storm in the quiet room. I pulled the phone away from the wall and stabbed the stop button. The screen showed the recording. 1 minute, 14 seconds. I had it. I had the evidence that would prove I wasn't losing my mind. My hands were still trembling as I lifted the phone to my ear and hit play. I heard a hiss, the soft, empty sound of static. I cranked the volume all the way up. The hiss grew louder. Underneath it, another sound started to emerge. A low, rapid, frantic drumming. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. It took me a second to realize what I was hearing. It was my own heart. The microphone hadn't picked up the piano. It hadn't recorded a single note of the music. It had only recorded the sound of silence and the terrified, rabbit-fast pounding in my own chest. There was nothing else on the recording. A wave of nausea and vertigo washed over me. I stumbled back, dropping the phone. It clattered to the hardwood floor. The screen was still lit, a lone beacon in the dark room. I braced myself against the opposite wall, gasping for air. It was a game. It knew what I was trying to do. It was playing with me. The music was just for me. My eyes followed the light from my phone as it cast a long, flat rectangle across the floor. It illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. It illuminated the base of the wall, the scuffed floorboards. It illuminated something else, something that shouldn't have been there. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. On the floor, barely visible in the phone's glow, were streaks. Faint, pale smudges against the dark wood, like someone had walked through a pile of powder and tracked it inside. I pushed myself off the wall, my legs feeling like lead. I walked over and picked up the phone, angling the light down. My blood ran cold. It was a trail of fine, white powder. Flour, blueberry muffin flour. The trail started right at the crack under my front door. It snaked across the living room floor, a ghostly path through the chaos of my unpacked boxes. It circled the sofa. It went past the kitchen. Then my heart stopped. The trail of faint, white footprints didn't end in the kitchen. It didn't go back to the door. It continued across the floor of the main room, a deliberate and unhurried path that ended right beside my bed, right at the spot where I would place my feet when I got up in the morning, right next to where I had slept. I didn't sleep. The trail of flour was a glowing scar on my floor, a path laid by a ghost. I didn't clean it up. I couldn't touch it. It was evidence. Evidence of what? I didn't know. I sat on a moving box in the living room, a bottle of lukewarm water in my hand, and just watched the faint white path as the sun came up. The city outside my window began to scream and honk and live, but in here there was only the flour. It started at my front door. It ended by my bed. Logic was useless now. Exhaustion? Stress? Did I get up in the night, bake a muffin in my sleep, track flour all over the apartment, and then eat the evidence? The idea was so insane it almost made sense. For about a second. Then I remembered the piano music. The recording of my own frantic heartbeat. The silence on the tape, where a melody should have been. I had to get out. I had to go to work. I had to pretend to be a normal person who lived in a normal apartment. I walked around the trail of flour like it was a string of landmines. I got dressed. I brushed my teeth. I didn't look in the mirror for too long. The guy looking back was pale. His eyes were wide. He looked like he was one bad night away from screaming on a street corner. On my way out, I stopped. I had to do something. I grabbed my phone and called my mom. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. "John, is everything okay?" Her voice was warm, a million miles away from this cold, hostile room. "Yeah, Mom. Hi." "Everything's fine," I lied. The words tasted like ash. "Just wanted to check in. How's Dad's garden?" We talked for 10 minutes. We talked about her new book club, about the leaky faucet Dad was refusing to fix, about my cousin's new baby. It was all so painfully, beautifully normal. It was a life raft. For those 10 minutes, I wasn't the man in the haunted apartment. I was just John, her son. I let her words wash over me, a dose of reality I desperately needed. "You sound tired, honey," she said, her maternal radar cutting through my act. "Are you eating right? Getting enough sleep?" "Just the new job," I said quickly. "It's a lot to take in. You know how it is." "Okay. Well, call me anytime, sweetheart. We love you." "Love you too, Mom." I hung up and stood in the hallway, my hand on the doorknob. I felt a little better, a tiny bit more grounded. It was just stress. Henderson was right. This city messes with your head. It had to be. I would work, come home, eat, sleep, and tomorrow this would all just be a weird story. I would not let this place break me. I locked the door behind me and didn't look back at the flour. The day was an 8-hour exercise in pretending. I nodded in meetings. I typed emails. I smiled at my new colleagues. I focused on the screen in front of me, forcing the image of the white footprints out of my mind. It almost worked. By the time I left the office, I felt a flicker of my old self returning. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe a good night's sleep was all I needed. My apartment building loomed over the street. I took a deep breath before walking into the lobby. The air was thick with the smell of disinfectant. Henderson was nowhere in sight. I took the elevator this time. A small victory. When the doors opened on the 4th floor, the hallway was silent. The door to 4B was just a door. Nothing more. I unlocked my apartment. The deadbolt slid back with a loud clack. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The flour was still there, untouched, just as I'd left it. A cold knot formed in my stomach, but I ignored it. I dropped my briefcase. I loosened my tie. I was going to make dinner, watch TV, and go to bed. That was the plan. I walked toward the kitchen and stopped. On the small, cheap coffee table between 2 unpacked boxes was a book. It hadn't been there this morning. I knew it. I knew it with a certainty that erased the tiny bit of calm I had built all day. It was a big book, a dark green, hardcover book with faded gold lettering. It looked old. I hadn't unpacked any of my books yet. They were all still in a box marked Books in the corner. This was not my book. My legs felt heavy as I walked toward it. My heart started that familiar, frantic rhythm. I reached out a shaking hand and touched the cover. It was real, solid, The title read, The Ghosts of New York. A sick feeling rose in my throat. This wasn't a random object. This was a message. My eyes scanned the book. There was a thin, red ribbon sticking out from between the pages, marking a spot. My fingers felt numb as I opened the book to the marked chapter. The chapter was titled, The Apartment Dwellers. It was a collection of short accounts, unsolved crimes and strange disappearances in old city apartment buildings. My eyes scanned the page. A paragraph was circled with a faint pencil line. I leaned closer to read it. Case 27B. The silent tenant of the Orville Building. In the winter of 1978, residents of the Orville Building on the Upper West Side began complaining about a new tenant, a musician in apartment 6E. They heard piano music at all hours, but no one ever saw him enter or leave. When the landlord finally used his master key to check the unit, he found it had been empty for years, thick with dust. The complaints stopped, but the legend of the silent pianist lived on. My blood ran cold. The piano. The goddamn piano. It was right there, in a book I did not own. My eyes darted to the margins of the page. Next to the circled paragraph, a small note was written in neat black ink. The handwriting was sharp, precise. Read this. It will be useful. Panic climbed up my throat like bile. This was real. This was happening. Someone was getting into my apartment. Someone was leaving things. Someone was playing a game with my mind. I scrambled for my phone. I needed to show someone. I needed proof. My sister, Sarah. She was logical. She would see it. She would believe me. I fumbled with the phone, my thumb slipping on the screen. I hit her contact and switched to video call. It rang twice. Her face popped up, smiling, a little grainy. "Hey, big bro. What's up? You look like you've seen a ghost." She laughed. "Sarah, listen to me. Don't laugh. I need you to just look." "Look at this," I said, my voice high and tight. I flipped the camera and aimed it at the coffee table. I made sure the book was perfectly in frame. The green cover. The gold letters. The red ribbon. "Okay, I'm looking," she said. Her voice was cautious now. "What am I looking at?" "The book, Sarah. Do you see the book on the table?" I was practically shouting. My hand was shaking, making the image unsteady. There was a pause. On the other end of the line, I could hear her shifting. "John, what are you talking about?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "What book?" "I just see the table and a bunch of your messy boxes. Are you feeling okay?" The world tilted on its axis. No, you don't understand." I switched the camera back to my face. My reflection was distorted, wild-eyed. "It's right there. I'm holding my phone right over it. It's a green book called The Ghost of New York." I switched the camera back again. The coffee table. The book. "John," she said softly, her smile completely gone. "Listen to me. There's nothing there. The table is empty." Her voice was the same one she used when I was a kid and had a nightmare. Soft, patronizing, disbelieving. "Maybe you should get some rest. It's been a big move." I looked from my phone screen to the table. On the screen, an empty, cheap wooden table. In front of my eyes, a heavy, green, hardcover book. My vision swam. My mind fractured. Both things were true. Both things were impossible. "I'm not crazy," I whispered, more to myself than to her. "I never said you were. Just get some sleep, okay? Call me in the morning." The line went dead. I was alone again. Alone with the book that existed and didn't exist at the same time. The air in the room felt thick, unbreathable. It knew. Whatever it was, it knew I was trying to get help. And it had cut me off. It had turned my own sister against me, made her think I was losing my grip. The silence in the apartment was a living thing now. It was watching me. Waiting. I threw the phone on the couch. I backed away from the coffee table, away from the impossible objects sitting on it. I needed a weapon. Something. Anything. My eyes landed on the corner, on the box of my old college stuff. I tore it open, throwing out old yearbooks and clothes until my hand closed around the cool, smooth wood of a Louisville Slugger. The baseball bat felt heavy and solid in my hands. Real. I gripped it tight, my knuckles white. Cough. The sound was soft. Dry. It came from the bedroom, my bedroom. My entire body went rigid. It wasn't a creak. It wasn't the building settling. It was a human sound. A sound someone makes when they're trying to be quiet. It's in the house. The thought was a bolt of pure ice. My breath hitched. My heart was a drum against my ribs. I raised the bat, holding it in front of me like a shield. My legs were shaking so hard I could barely stand. One step, then another. I moved across the living room, my sneakers silent on the hardwood floor. I didn't take my eyes off the bedroom doorway. It was a black rectangle of absolute dread. I reached the doorway. I could hear my own ragged breathing. I flattened myself against the wall, the bat held high, ready to swing. I took one final, shuddering breath and reached a hand around the corner, slapping the wall until I found the light switch. I flicked it on. The bedroom was flooded with harsh, yellow light. It was empty. My bed was neatly made, just as I'd left it this morning. The closet door was shut. There was no one there. Relief washed over me, so intense it made me dizzy. It was my mind again. Just my mind. I lowered the bat, leaning against the doorframe, my legs weak. But something was wrong. My eyes swept the room again. The bed. The pillows. On my pillow, the one on the right side of the bed, there was an indentation. A perfect, head-shaped hollow, pressed deep into the fabric, as if someone had just been sitting there, leaning against the headboard, watching the door, watching me, waiting for me to come in. My stomach dropped. I took a step back, pulling away from the doorway, away from that empty, occupied room. My foot caught on something on the floor. I stumbled, catching myself on the wall, the baseball bat clattering to the ground. I looked down to see what I had tripped over. It was my keychain. I must have dropped it when I came in. The familiar silver keys to my car, my parents' house. All there. But there was another key, hooked onto the same ring, one I had never seen before in my life. It was an old key, made of dark, tarnished brass. It was ornate, skeletal, like something from 100 years ago, and scratched crudely into its flat, round top were two characters, a number and a letter, 4B. My hand was shaking. I stared at the key. 4B. The brass felt cold, alien against my skin. It was an object that should not exist, yet here it was, hooked onto my life, my keychain, as if it had always belonged. It was heavier than my other keys. It felt ancient, weighted with a history I didn't want to know. The baseball bat lay on the floor where I'd dropped it, a useless piece of wood. A bat was for a person you could see. What do you do with a key? What door do you unlock when the thing you're afraid of is already inside? I unhooked it. The metal scraped against the ring, a small, shrill sound in the dead air. I didn't want to touch it, but I couldn't leave it there. I walked into the kitchen, my movements stiff, robotic. I pulled open the junk drawer, a chaotic mess of rubber bands, old mail, and takeout menus. I threw the key inside. It landed with a dull clink on a pile of loose change. I slammed the drawer shut. For a second, I felt a flicker of control. I had contained it. Put it away. A stupid, childish thought. But it was all I had. Sleep was not an option. Sleep was surrender. Sleep was when it did things. The indentation on the pillow was an image burned onto the back of my eyelids. No, tonight I would be awake. Tonight I would be waiting. I went back to the kitchen and made coffee. Not a cup. A whole pot. I found the biggest mug I owned, one I'd bought at a tourist shop years ago, and filled it to the brim with black, bitter coffee. The machine gurgled and hissed, sounds that were comforting just hours ago, but now they just felt loud, exposing. I was making noise. I was letting it know I was awake. I carried the steaming mug to the living room and sat on the sofa. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't look at my phone. I positioned myself so I had a clear line of sight to the front door. I would sit here all night if I had to. I would drink my coffee, and I would watch that door. If anything tried to come in, I'd see it. I'd be ready. My heart was still hammering, a frantic rhythm against the silence. I took a long sip of the coffee. It was scalding, but the pain was good. It was real. It kept me grounded. The hours crawled by. 1 o'clock. The city outside had quieted to a low hum. The coffee was working. My senses felt sharp, raw. Every creak of the building was a footstep. Every siren in the distance was a scream coming closer. I finished the first mug and went back for a second. My hands were steady now, fueled by caffeine and a cold, hard resolve. I would not be the crazy one. I would not be the victim. I was the man who lived here. This was my apartment. I sat back on the sofa. I started to feel the exhaustion clawing at the edges of my focus. My eyes burned. My thoughts were a looping track of the book, the key, the pillow. It was a game. It had to be. A sick, elaborate game. And tonight, I was refusing to play. I was just an audience member, watching the empty stage. It was almost 2 in the morning when the sound came. Tap, tap, tap. My whole body went rigid. I froze mid-sip, the mug hovering near my lips. The sound was soft, but it cut through the silence like a razor. It was the rhythm, the same exact rhythm from the first night. The 3 light, evenly spaced taps against the wall. My eyes were locked on the front door. Nothing. Not a shadow, not a flicker through the peephole. Tap, tap, tap. It came again. Closer this time, my blood froze. It wasn't coming from the front door. It wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from the bedroom. My breath hitched in my throat. I slowly, carefully, placed the mug down on the floor. I didn't make a sound. The cheap coffee table with its non-existent book was between me and the bedroom hallway. I listened, every nerve ending firing at once. The sound was specific, precise. It wasn't the wall separating my apartment from 4B. It was coming from my closet. The baseball bat was on the other side of the room. Too far. I pushed myself up from the sofa, my legs shaking so badly I had to steady myself on the armrest. I needed a weapon. My eyes darted around the room, landing on the unpacked kitchen box. I crept over to it, my sneakers silent on the hardwood. I tore open the cardboard, my hands ripping through the packing tape. Utensils! Plates! I rummaged deeper, my fingers closing around the cold, hard plastic handle of a chef's knife. It was large, heavy. I pulled it out. The polished steel gleamed faintly in the dim city light filtering through the window. I held the knife out in front of me, my grip so tight my knuckles were white. 1 step, then another. I moved down the short hallway towards the bedroom door, which stood wide open. A black rectangle of dread. The light was off. I flattened myself against the wall, my back scraping against the drywall. I could hear my own ragged breathing, loud in the suffocating quiet. I peered around the doorframe. The room was a landscape of shadows, the bed, the window, the closet door, and then I saw it. The closet door wasn't fully closed. It was open. Just a crack, a thin, vertical sliver of absolute blackness. It had been shut when I left the room. I knew it. I had seen it. I took a step into the room. The floorboard under my foot let out a low groan. I froze. From inside the closet, I heard a sound. It was not a tap. It was not a creak. It was breathing. A soft, slow, steady inhale and exhale. It was calm, unhurried. The sound of someone waiting patiently in the dark. My mind screamed, "It's in the closet! It's in my closet!" My whole world narrowed to that crack in the door and the sound coming from it. This was not the building. This was not the pipes. This was a presence. Here. Now. My phone, sitting on the nightstand where I'd left it, suddenly buzzed. The vibration was violently loud in the silence. It made me jump, a strangled yelp escaping my lips. My eyes shot to the phone. The screen lit up, casting a pale, ghostly light across the room. It was a text message. From an unknown number. My legs felt like cement, but I forced myself to move toward it. I needed to see. The knife was still in my hand, pointed at the closet. I snatched the phone off the nightstand. My thumb shook as I unlocked it. The message was 1 sentence. "It's cold. Can I borrow your jacket?" Dusty. Panic, pure and undiluted, ripped through me. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't a ghost, it was something that got cold. Something that knew I had jackets in that closet. Something that was texting me from 5 feet away. The casualness of it, the polite, simple request, it shattered what was left of my sanity. That was it. The line was crossed, reason was gone, replaced by a raw, primal surge of terror and rage. "Get out!" I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't think. I lunged. I ran the few feet to the closet door and threw my entire body weight against it, slamming it shut. The wood hit the frame with a deafening crack. I pressed myself against it, my shoulder digging into the cheap particle board, the knife still clutched in my hand. And then it happened. The door pushed back. It wasn't a gentle pressure. It was a solid, immense physical force. It was like shoving against a brick wall that was shoving back. My feet slid on the floor. A grunt of effort and shock was torn from me. I was in a physical struggle. My heart exploded in my chest. I was fighting something on the other side of the door. "Get out of my house!" I roared, desperation giving me strength. I dug my heels in and pushed with everything I had. The door groaned. The frame creaked. There was no sound from the other side. No voice. No growl. Just a silent, overpowering strength. It was a dead weight. A pressure that felt like it could crush me. My muscles screamed in protest. My shoulder felt like it was going to dislocate. The doorknob dug painfully into my hip. This was real. This was a fight. The silence of it was the worst part. A quiet, brutal contest of force in the middle of my bedroom. Sweat poured down my face, stinging my eyes. I could feel the force on the other side give, just an inch. I yelled, a wordless sound of exertion, and put every ounce of my being into one final shove. I was winning. I could beat it. Suddenly, it was gone. The pressure vanished, completely. All at once. With nothing to push against, I lost my balance and crashed forward, my shoulder hitting the door hard before I stumbled back, falling onto the floor in a heap. The chef's knife clattered out of my hand, sliding under the bed. I lay there on the floor, gasping for air, my body trembling uncontrollably. Silence. The fight was over. The room was still. The closet door was closed. I pushed myself up, my body aching. I was alive. I had won. I had forced it back. But what was it? I crawled over and retrieved the knife. The cool handle a small comfort. I got to my feet, my legs unsteady. I had to look. I had to know. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob. It felt ice cold. I turned it slowly. It clicked. I pulled the door open. Harsh yellow light from the bedside lamp I must have knocked on flooded the small space. It was empty. My clothes were hanging there, shirts on the left, pants on the right, just as I had arranged them. A few pairs of shoes were lined up neatly on the floor. There was no one there. There was no sign of a struggle. It was just a closet. A wave of dizzying relief washed over me, so strong it almost buckled my knees. It was my mind. It had to be. A stress-induced hallucination. A waking nightmare. The fight, the pressure. It was all in my head, but my eyes scanned the row of clothes. Something was wrong. The order was right, but there was a gap, a space on the rod that hadn't been there before. My gaze fell on the heavy-duty hanger near the end. The black wool coat I had bought just last week, the nicest piece of clothing I owned, was gone. I didn't sleep. I don't think I even blinked. I sat on the cold floor of the living room, my back against the sofa, a cheap wool blanket pulled around my shoulders. My weapon, the chef's knife, lay beside me. My eyes were fixed on the black rectangle of the bedroom hallway. A few times, I thought I heard something, a floorboard settling, the hum of the fridge, and my hand would dart out, my fingers closing around the knife's handle. Then nothing. The sun started to bleed through the blinds, casting long, dusty stripes across the floor. Gray, morning light. A new day. I had survived the night. I felt no relief. I just felt tired, a deep, bone-grinding exhaustion that caffeine couldn't touch anymore. My shoulder ached from where I'd slammed it into the closet door. My hip was bruised from the doorknob. These were real pains. Tangible proof. The pressure against the door had been real, but the empty closet, the missing coat. My mind refused to connect the two. It was easier to believe I was breaking, A person could go to a doctor for a broken mind. Who do you call for a coat-stealing ghost that texts you? Okay, I said aloud, my voice a dry croak. The sound was alien in the apartment. Okay. I forced myself to stand. My legs were stiff, my joints protesting. I had to choose a reality. There were two options. Option A. A sentient, invisible entity is in my apartment, strong enough to fight me, capable of using technology, and has a particular interest in my outerwear. Option B. I'm losing my goddamn mind. Stress. The move. Isolation. Maybe a gas leak. All the classic hits. Sanity felt much, much further away. But insanity was still the easier road to walk. It was a road I could understand. I walked into the kitchen, avoiding the junk drawer with the key in it as if it were radioactive. I poured out the rest of the cold, sludgy coffee from the pot. I needed a new plan. Waiting for something to happen was a victim's game. I needed answers. Not ghost answers. Real answers. I grabbed my laptop from my work bag, sat at the small dinette table, and opened it. The screen was too bright. I squinted, typing into the search bar. I started broad. The building's address. Then I got more specific. The address plus death. The address plus accident. The address, apartment 4B. I sifted through rental listings, zoning documents, old city records. Nothing. It was just a building. A boring, anonymous block of brick and mortar. I was about to give up, to accept my new life as a raving lunatic when I found it. It wasn't on a news site. It was a link, buried in the comments section of a local history forum. A hyperlink to a defunct blog, a GeoCities-looking relic from the early 2000s called Forgotten Corners of the City. The page took forever to load. When it finally did, there was a grainy photo of my building, taken at a bad angle. The title of the post read, The Baker of 4B. My breath caught. I scrolled down, my eyes flying across the poorly formatted text. It was written by some amateur historian, a ghost enthusiast. The story was simple, tragic. In the late 1980s, a woman named Eliza Murray had lived in apartment 4B. The post described her as a recluse, a quiet woman whose only joy seemed to be baking for her neighbors and listening to classical music on her record player. She had been involved with a married man who lived in the building. When he broke it off to go back to his wife, Eliza had been devastated. One night she sealed her kitchen door, turned on the gas oven without lighting it, and laid down. Suicide. The post ended with a note that, for years afterward, tenants had complained about the faint smell of gas and the sound of a woman weeping in the halls. I leaned back in my chair. There it was. A name, a story. A goddamn ghost story cliché, but it was something. Eliza Murray. The baker. A woman scorned. It explained the old-fashioned feel of the neighborly gestures. The pie. The book. It didn't explain the text message or the physical struggle at the closet, but maybe ghosts evolved. Maybe they learned new tricks. My fear, which had been a wild, formless beast, now had a face. Eliza. It was still terrifying, but it was a contained terror. A known quantity. My printer, which sat on the far corner of the desk, switched on. The sound made me jump out of my skin. It whirred to life, a series of mechanical groans and clicks that was offensively loud in the still apartment. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't printed anything in weeks. I stared at it, frozen, as the machine pulled a single sheet of paper through its guts. The tray spit it out with a final, definitive thump chunk. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. I walked over to the printer like I was approaching a bomb. The paper sat there in the output tray, face down. My hand was shaking as I reached for it. I picked it up. I turned it over. It was a photograph, or a copy of one. Black and white, faded and grainy, like it had been photocopied a dozen times. It was a close-up portrait of a woman. She had dark, severe hair pulled back from her face, high cheekbones, and eyes that were deep-set and hollow. She wasn't smiling. She looked disappointed, like she'd been waiting for something that never came. It was not the face of a friendly baker. This was the face of a warden. And beneath the image, in a simple, typed font, were two words. Not me. I stumbled back, dropping the paper. It fluttered to the floor. What the hell? I scrambled back to my laptop, my fingers fumbling on the trackpad. I found the blog post again. I clicked on a link in the text that read, News Clipping. A scanned image of an old newspaper article appeared, and with it, a small, grainy headshot of the real Eliza Murray. She was blonde, round-faced. She had a soft, sad smile. She looked nothing, absolutely nothing, like the woman on the paper now lying on my floor. My blood ran cold. This wasn't Eliza. This was something else. This was something that knew I was looking for Eliza, something that was correcting me. It was steering me. I felt a wave of nausea. The tidy ghost story I had built for myself was a lie, a deliberate misdirection. The circle wasn't being contained. It was being redrawn around me, tighter this time. The lights went out. One moment, the room was lit by the gray morning light and the glow of my laptop. The next, it was plunged into near-total darkness. It wasn't a power outage. I heard the distinct click of the light switch by the front door, a sharp, intentional sound. Then, black. My breath hitched in my throat. I didn't move. I didn't dare. My body was a statue. My eyes, wide and useless, strained against the dark. The only light was the faint, dim glow of my laptop screen, painting a ghostly aura on the table. My own face was probably reflected in it, a mask of pure terror. And then I heard it. A sound. Right in front of me. Scratch. I flinched. The sound was small, dry. It came from the surface of the desk, no more than 3 feet away. Scratch. 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 Hiss. My mind took a full second to process what I was hearing. It was the sound of a pen. A ballpoint pen. Moving across paper. It was coming from right where I had been sitting, from the spot where the newspaper article about Eliza Murray was still displayed on my laptop screen, where the printed-out photo lay on the floor. It was right there with me, in the dark, writing. I squeezed my eyes shut. This can't be real. This is not happening. I tried to command my legs to run, my mouth to scream, but nothing worked. I was paralyzed, locked in place by a fear so absolute it felt like a physical weight. All I could do was listen. The sound was calm at first. Methodical, the steady scratching of a pen, writing a letter, maybe. Then the rhythm changed. It got faster, harder. The scratch became a frantic, angry scribble. The pressure of the pen increased. I could hear it digging into the paper, tearing at the fibers. It was a sound of pure rage, a furious, silent tantrum happening in the dark right in front of my face. The air grew thick, heavy. I could feel the presence. It wasn't a ghost story anymore. It was an occupation. My own breathing was a distant roaring in my ears. I was going to pass out. I was going to die right here, standing in my kitchen, listening to an invisible thing scribble hate mail. Click! The lights flickered back on. The sudden brightness was a physical blow. I cried out, a pathetic, strangled noise, and threw my hands up to shield my eyes. Spots danced in my vision. The room swam back into focus. The printer, the table, the laptop, its screen still glowing. Everything was exactly as it had been, except for the paper. The single sheet I had dropped on the floor was now sitting perfectly centered on the desk, right in front of the laptop. The face of the severe, dark-haired woman stared up at me. And beneath her picture, beneath the neatly typed words, "Not me," there was something new. It was a line of handwriting. It was scrawled across the bottom of the page in thick, ragged strokes of red ink. The letters were misshapen, slanted, dug into the paper with so much force that it had nearly torn through. It looked less like writing and more like a wound. My eyes focused on the words. My brain struggled to read them, to accept them. 5 words, written in the color of blood. A command. A correction. A promise. Don't look for it. Look for me. I stood there, the paper in my hand, feeling heavier than a tombstone. The lights hummed. The refrigerator hummed. My entire world was humming with a sick, electric current. Don't look for it. Look for me. The red ink was messy, angry. It was a brand on the page. My brain was a mess of short-circuiting wires. It. Me. Two things? Eliza Murray was it. The ghost story I'd found online. The neat, tragic little box I had tried to stuff this whole thing into. And this new thing, this thing that wrote on my printer paper, was me. It wasn't warning me about Eliza. It was pushing her out of the way. It was taking center stage, pissed off that I was looking at someone else. This wasn't a haunting. This was a hostile takeover. I let the paper drop. I couldn't hold it anymore. My hand was shaking too hard. I backed away, my eyes locked on the front door. I could just leave. Grab my wallet and keys and walk out. Never come back. Let the landlord deal with the furniture. Just go. But the words on the paper weren't just a statement. They were a command. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my gut, that leaving wouldn't work. This wasn't tied to the apartment. The text message proved that. This was tied to me. So running wasn't an option, fighting wasn't an option. What was left? I had to obey. I had to look for me. And me was in 4B. My thoughts raced. Breaking down the door was stupid. Calling the cops was pointless. Officer, my ghost neighbor is demanding my attention. They'd put me in a padded room. I needed a way in. A quiet way. A smart way. My mind snagged on a memory. Henderson, the building super. A grumpy old guy with a permanent scowl and nicotine-stained fingers. When I moved in, he'd been complaining about the city. Gotta replace the risers in the whole B-line, he'd grumbled, gesturing vaguely upwards. Gonna be dust and noise for a month. Paperwork's a nightmare. Paperwork. Blueprints. A plan, hot and desperate, flashed in my mind. It was a long shot, but it was better than sitting here waiting for the lights to go out again. I snatched my jacket. Not the one that was stolen, another one, and my keys, and I was out the door. The hallway felt different. Every shadow seemed deeper. Every door I passed felt like it had an eye behind it. I took the stairs down to the basement, where Henderson's workshop/office was tucked behind the boiler room. The air was thick with the smell of damp concrete and old paint. He was there, sitting at a metal desk under a bare bulb, meticulously cleaning a set of wrenches. Henderson, I said. My voice was too loud. He looked up, not hiding his annoyance. What? Sorry to bother you. I'm in 4A. I just had a question about the building. Rent's due on the 1st. Talk to management. He went back to his wrench. No, it's not that. It's a structural thing. I was improvising, the words spilling out. I've been hearing these noises, creaking, and last night I swear I saw a crack forming in my bathroom wall, the one that I share with 4B. That got his attention. He put the wrench down. A crack? Where? On the tile, near the floor. And sometimes, I leaned in, lowering my voice, I think I smell gas. Just a little. Faint. From that side. I was using the ghost story against itself. Gas. The baker of 4B. It was a story someone like Henderson, who'd been here for 30 years, would know. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not alarm. More like weary recognition. He grunted, pushing his chair back. Probably just the building settling. This place is old. I know, but with the work you said you were doing on the pipes, I just want to be sure. I've got my own work from home, expensive computer gear. A gas leak, a burst pipe, you know. I'll let the sentence hang there. He stared at me for a long moment, then sighed. A long, rattling sound. He hated this. He hated me. But a potential lawsuit from a tenant was worse. He heaved himself up and walked over to a large metal filing cabinet, the drawers screeching as he pulled one open. He pawed through a mess of folders before pulling out a long, rolled-up tube of yellowed paper tied with a grubby string. Here, he said, shoving it at me. B-line floor plans, bathroom plumbing and ventilation. See for yourself. There are no gas lines on that wall, just the main vent stack. Now don't lose it. Thanks. I'll bring it right back, I said, my heart hammering. Yeah. he muttered, already back at his desk. I didn't go straight back to my apartment. I went into the laundry room next door. It was empty. I unrolled the blueprints on top of a folding table. The paper was brittle, the blue lines faded. It smelled like dust and history. My eyes scanned the complex diagrams, tracing pipes and electrical conduits. There was my apartment, 4A. And there, beside it, 4B. My finger moved to the two bathrooms, shown as small squares pressed up against each other. They were mirror images: toilet, sink, tub, and there, connecting them, was a single shared rectangle labeled vent shaft, an old ventilation duct. Probably from before modern exhaust fans were a thing. A relic, a tiny forgotten highway between the two rooms. I rolled the blueprints up and ran back upstairs. My hands were sweating. I didn't care about the crack or the gas. That was just a story. The vent was real. The note said, "Look for me." I was going to look. My bathroom was cold. The tile was unforgiving under my feet. I looked at the wall above the toilet. There it was, a metal grill, about 8 inches square, painted over a dozen times. I'd never even noticed it before. It was just part of the wall. Now it was a doorway. I got a flathead screwdriver from the drawer in the kitchen, the one where the key to 4B still sat. A cold piece of metal I refused to touch. The screws on the grill were caked with paint. I had to scrape it away first, the flakes falling like dirty snow onto the toilet tank. Then I put the screwdriver to the first screw and twisted. It groaned in protest, a long, metallic screech that seemed to echo in the small room. My whole body was tense. Every sound felt like a betrayal. One screw, then the second. It was looser. The third was rusted tight. I had to put my shoulder into it, my muscles straining, until it gave way with a sudden, sharp crack. The fourth came out easy. The grill was loose. I pried it off with my fingertips. It came away with a final pull, trailing cobwebs and dust. Behind it was a square of perfect darkness. A wave of musty, dead air washed over my face. It smelled like secrets. My plan was simple. My phone, the camera, the flashlight. I turned on the camera app, then hit the flash to turn on the light. A powerful white beam shot from the back of the phone. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and pushed the phone into the hole. The screen in my hand became my eyes. The beam cut through the thick, ancient dust. The inside of the shaft was a narrow, metal-lined tunnel. It was filthy, caked with a century of grime. I pushed the phone deeper, angling it to the right, towards 4B. For a second, all I saw was the other side of the metal shaft. I nudged the phone further, and then I saw it. The other grill. The one in 4B. I maneuvered the phone closer, the image on my screen shaky. I could see through the slats of the grill into the other bathroom, a corner of it at least. I could see a tiled wall, just like mine, but the tiles were a different color, a pale yellow. I saw the edge of a porcelain bathtub. The place wasn't empty. It wasn't derelict. The tile was clean. The chrome lip of the tub sparkled, reflecting the beam from my phone. There was a bottle of shampoo sitting on the edge of the tub. A green bottle, and next to it, a bar of soap in a clean ceramic dish. It wasn't dusty, it wasn't abandoned. It was just neat, impossibly neat. My theory of a squatter, some creep living in the filth, evaporated. This was something else. This was a place that was cared for. I held my breath, trying to see more, trying to make sense of it. The tidy, clean room was somehow more terrifying than a dusty crypt. A ghost you could understand. A squatter, you could call the cops on. What do you do with this? A meticulously clean secret neighbor who plays mind games and scribbles threats in red ink? That's when a shadow fell across my tiny window into that world. My blood turned to ice. It happened fast. A shape blocked the light. A foot. A human foot. Bare. Stepping onto the bath mat I could now see just below the tub. Then a leg. The shadow shifted. A figure had walked into the bathroom. I couldn't see a face. Just the shape of a person from the shoulders down, standing in front of the sink, their back to me. They were wearing a simple, dark t-shirt and gray pants. My thumb slammed down on the volume button of my phone, killing the flashlight beam instantly. The screen went black. The darkness in the vent shaft was total. I froze, my arms still stuck in the wall. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to pull back, to run, but I was paralyzed. Did they see it? Did they see the light flash through their grill? The person in the other bathroom stopped moving. For a full 5 seconds there was only silence. I could hear my own blood roaring in my ears. I didn't breathe. Then the shadow turned. Slowly. It turned its head, and then its body until it was facing the wall. Facing the vent. Facing me. It stood there, a dark silhouette in its own, dimly lit room. It knew. It had to know. There was no other reason to stop and stare at a blank spot on a bathroom wall. It was looking right at the grill, right where my phone was. It knew I was watching. The silence stretched. It was a physical thing, a weight pressing in on me. 10 seconds passed. An eternity. My lungs were on fire. The shadow raised a hand. I saw the motion, a pale shape moving in the gloom on my dead phone screen. It wasn't fast. It was slow. Deliberate. The hand came up, formed a fist, and moved towards the wall beside the vent. It stopped, the knuckles just inches from the tile. I watched the fist on my screen. I braced for the sound to come from the phone, faint and tinny through the microphone. I saw the knuckles tap the wall. 1, 2, 3. The sound didn't come from the phone. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was loud, hard. It didn't come from the vent shaft. It came from right beside me, from the wall of my own bathroom, not 2 feet from my head. The solid, tiled wall vibrated with the force of it. It saw the knock in one place, and I heard it in another. It wasn't in the other room. It was here. I ripped the phone out of the wall. My arm was a machine, acting on its own. It came away with a horrible crack of plastic and plaster. The darkness in the shaft was absolute. My own bathroom was a gray box around me. I scrambled backwards, falling off the toilet seat and hitting the floor hard. The phone clattered against the tile. Knock. 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 It came again. From the wall. Harder this time. The tile under my hand vibrated. It was real. Solid. 3 impacts. Inches from my face. My mind was just static. White noise. How? There was no space. There was no how. The blueprints were a lie. The laws of physics were a lie. Or the sound wasn't coming from the other side. The thought hit me like a physical blow. The sound was coming from inside my wall. A person. Not a ghost. Not a gas leak. A person. A living, breathing person who had somehow set up a life inside the walls of this building. The clean bathroom. The shampoo. The knock. It wasn't a haunting. It was an infestation. An impossibly clever, impossibly quiet infestation that knew I was looking. It had seen my light. It had mocked me with a knock. The ghost story about Eliza Murray, the baker of 4B, was a smokescreen. A perfect piece of camouflage. Who would look for a man in the walls when they were busy looking for a ghost in the apartment? It wasn't just a stalker. It was a predator who had built its nest, and I had just tapped on the glass. My paralysis broke. I wasn't fighting a ghost, I was fighting a man. A man who was a better magician than Houdini. I couldn't call the cops. Officer? There's someone knocking from inside my wall. They'd bring a straitjacket, not a sledgehammer. I needed proof. Hard, undeniable proof that someone else could see. A picture. A video. Something that wasn't just my word against the silence. I lurched to my feet, my legs shaking. My apartment, my safe space, was now just a bigger cage. He could be anywhere. Listening, I had to get out. I grabbed my keys and my wallet, not bothering with a jacket. I didn't lock the door. What was the point? The locks were a joke. I practically ran down the hallway, down the stairs, and burst out into the night air. The city was loud, chaotic. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. For a full minute I just stood there, breathing in exhaust fumes, letting the noise of traffic wash over me. Then the mission started. 20 minutes later, I was in a 24-hour electronics store. The fluorescent lights felt like an interrogation. I walked past the giant TVs and the sleek laptops, my eyes scanning for one thing: security. I found the aisle. It was a wall of white boxes showing happy families checking on their dogs from vacation. I needed the smallest one I could find, something discreet. I found it. A tiny black cube, a Wi-Fi camera no bigger than a shot glass. It was perfect. I paid in cash and walked out, the small box feeling like a weapon in my pocket. My return to the building was a stealth operation. I took the stairs, my sneakers silent on the concrete steps. I held my breath every time I passed a landing. The fourth-floor hallway was dead quiet. My own front door was slightly ajar, just as I'd left it. I ignored it. My target was 4B. The plan was simple. The camera had a magnetic base. The door numbers in the hallway were cheap metal. I'd stick it on the number 6 on the door of 6B across the hall. It would have a clear, direct view of the entire door of 4B. I connected the camera to my phone's Wi-Fi network, right there in the stairwell. The app came online. A grainy, wide-angle view of my own face stared back at me. It worked. I moved into the hallway. Every floorboard creaked. I held the tiny camera in my sweaty palm. I reached the spot, my back to the wall. I looked at the door of 4B. It was just a door. Brown paint, brass handle. Nothing. I listened. I heard my own blood pounding in my ears. Nothing else. Quickly, I stepped across the hall. I placed the camera on the door of 6B. The magnet clicked softly into place. It was angled down, perfectly capturing the threshold of 4B. I retreated back to the stairwell, my phone now a live feed. The image was clear. The empty hallway. The silent door. Now, I wait. I slipped back into my own apartment, locking the door this time. It felt stupid, but it was all I could do. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat on my sofa in the dark, the phone screen, the only light in the room. I watched the live feed. The hallway was a silent, empty stage. I watched for an hour. Nothing. Not a sound. Not a flicker of movement. Another hour passed. My eyes burned from staring at the small screen. My adrenaline was gone, replaced by a deep, bone-aching exhaustion. My body was shutting down. I told myself I would just rest my eyes for a minute. Just a minute. The image of the empty hallway was burned into my retinas. Empty. Silent. Safe. I woke up with a jolt. The phone had slipped from my hand, landing on the cushion beside me. The room was dark, but a gray light was starting to filter through the windows. Morning! My neck was stiff. My mouth was dry. How long was I out? I grabbed the phone, my thumb fumbling to wake the screen. The camera app was still open, but the live feed was gone. In its place, a black screen with 2 white words. No signal. My blood ran cold. I stabbed at the reconnect button on the app. It spun for a second, then failed. No signal. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. I scrambled off the sofa, my legs tangled in the blanket. I hadn't even realized I'd pulled over myself. I ran to the door, fumbled with the locks, and threw it open. I stared down the hallway. It looked exactly the same. The doors were all closed. The light was dim. I ran across the hall to 6B, my bare feet slapping against the worn carpet. My eyes shot to the spot where I had placed the camera. It was gone. The space was empty. The metal number 6 was bare. I ran my fingers over it. Nothing. I looked on the floor. Nothing. It had vanished completely. A scream of pure frustration was building in my throat. No proof. Of course, no proof. He knew. He was always one step ahead. Then I saw it. It wasn't on the door. It was on the floor, directly below where the camera had been, placed neatly in the center of a worn spot on the carpet. A single AA battery. My mind went blank. I couldn't process it. It was so small, so mundane. A battery. I stared at it. It wasn't dropped. It was placed. Carefully, deliberately. It was a message. It was a trophy. It was the power source for my camera, ripped out and left as a calling card. I see your little toy. I took it. Here's a piece of it back, so you know it was me. I backed away slowly, my eyes locked on the battery. It felt more threatening than a knife. I stumbled back into my own apartment and slammed the door, shooting the deadbolt home with a loud, final thunk. My whole body was shaking. I slid down the door, my head in my hands. Defeated. I had nothing. Less than nothing. That's when my phone rang. The sound shattered the silence. It was loud, shrill, and I nearly screamed. I fumbled in my pocket for it. I looked at the screen. The breath caught in my throat. It was my own number calling me. My name, my number, displayed on my own screen. My mind refused to work. It was impossible. A trick. I should just let it ring. Deny it. Don't answer. But my thumb, acting on its own, swiped across the screen. I put the phone to my ear, my hand trembling so hard it was a miracle I didn't drop it. "Hello?" My voice was a choked whisper. There was silence on the other end. No, not silence. There was a sound. A quiet, rhythmic sound. In and out. In and out. A soft, wheezing noise. It was familiar. Terribly familiar. It was the sound of someone breathing while they slept. It was the sound of me, snoring softly on the sofa, an hour ago. I was listening to a recording of myself, asleep and vulnerable, in what I thought was the safety of my own locked apartment. The phone dropped from my hand and hit the floor. The sound of my own breathing continued to echo from the small speaker, filling the silent room. The phone lay on the wooden floor, a small black rectangle spitting out the sound of my own sleep. The recording was clean. Too clean. It wasn't just my snoring. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant rumble of a truck passing on the street below. He hadn't just recorded it. He had been in the room, standing there, listening. He had captured the sound of my apartment, with me in it, a helpless piece of the audio landscape. My mind was a blank slate. The terror from a moment ago was so total it had short-circuited everything. There was no room for thought, only a hollow space where my sanity used to be. A person was inside my walls. A person had been inside my room while I slept. A person had my camera. A person was calling me from my own number. The loop of me snoring finally ended. The call disconnected. The silence that rushed in was worse than the sound. It was absolute. It was listening. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't be a victim cowering on the floor. My paralysis broke, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. This wasn't a ghost. This was a man. And if he was a man, he had weaknesses. He wasn't omnipotent. He was using the building, the other tenants, as a shield. I had to break through that shield. I had tried technology and failed. Now I would try people. Someone in this building had to be a human being. Someone had to have heard something, seen something, that didn't fit the neat little story of the empty apartment 4B. I scrambled to my feet, my joints protesting. I needed an ally, a witness. Someone to stand beside me and say, yes, I heard it too. Someone whose word wasn't tainted by what would surely sound like a complete mental breakdown. I pulled on a pair of jeans and a hoodie, my hand shaking so badly it took me 2 tries to pull the zipper up. I didn't bother with shoes. I didn't want to make a sound. My first target was 5F, the apartment directly above mine. A college student, I thought. Someone young, maybe less jaded, less willing to ignore strange things. I took the stairs, each step a calculated placement of my bare foot on the cool concrete. The 5th-floor hallway was identical to mine, a long, dim corridor of closed doors. I stood in front of 5F, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I raised a hand and knocked. 3 soft raps. I heard movement inside, the scrape of a chair, the muffled clink of a chain lock being slid. The door opened a few inches, held by the chain. A young woman with tired eyes and dark hair, pulled into a messy bun, peered out at me. She looked wary, the way you look at a stranger who shows up at your door after midnight, even though the sun was now up. "Yeah?" she asked. Her voice was flat. "Sorry to bother you," I started, trying to keep my own voice even. "I live in 4F, right below you. I just had a weird question." Her eyes flicked down the hallway, toward the stairwell door, then back to me. A flicker of something, not just caution, fear. "I've been hearing things," I said, lowering my voice. "From the apartment next to mine. 4B, noises, voices." The change in her face was instant. The wary mask became a blank wall. She shook her head before I even finished my sentence. No, she said, the word sharp and final. Haven't heard a thing. It's a quiet floor. This whole side of the building is... Are you sure? I pressed, desperation creeping in. Even late at night? Music or someone walking around? I said no. Her eyes darted toward the stairs again. More urgently this time. She started to close the door. Look, I have a class. I gotta go. Wait, I said, putting a hand up. This is important. Someone is living in that apartment. It's not supposed to be empty. Her face was pale. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking past me, into the empty hall, as if she expected someone to appear. I don't know what you're talking about, she whispered. I don't hear anything. I don't know anything. Just leave it alone. The door closed. The deadbolt shot home with a loud, definitive thud. I stood there for a full minute. She wasn't dismissive. She was terrified. She wasn't lying because she hadn't heard anything. She was lying because she had. That glance down the hallway wasn't for her own escape. She was checking to see if someone was listening to our conversation. She knew. She knew, and she was too scared to talk. The cold anger in my gut hardened into something else. Resolve. I wasn't crazy. This was real. Second target, the old man in 3F. Directly below me. He'd lived here for years, according to Henderson. He must know every creak of the building. I went back down one flight, the hope from a moment ago now a twisted, ugly knot in my stomach. I knocked on 3F. The response was faster. No chain lock this time. The door swung open to reveal a grizzled man in a stained undershirt. He had a sour, pinched face and eyes that looked like they'd seen everything and hated all of it. What do you want? He grunted. I'm from 4F, I said. I wanted to ask you about the building, he scowled. Building's fine. Go away. No, wait, I pleaded. It's about apartment 4B, the one next to mine. Do you ever hear anything from up there? His eyes narrowed. He took a step forward, his shadow falling over me. He smelled of stale cigarettes and something else, something like old paper and dust. You the new kid? Yeah, I just moved in. He let out a short, bitter laugh. Listen to me, new kid. You want to live here in peace? You mind your own business. You hear something? You didn't hear it. You see something? You didn't see it. You keep your head down and you pay your rent on time. But there's someone in there, I insisted, my voice rising. They're messing with me. They were in my apartment. The old man's face went dark. His expression wasn't one of disbelief. It was one of grim, settled acceptance. Then you must have done something to piss him off, he hissed, his voice a low growl. That's your problem, not mine. Don't you dare bring your trouble to my door again. He slammed the door in my face. The force of it made the air in the hallway move. I stumbled back. It wasn't just fear. It wasn't just a conspiracy of silence. It was a system. A set of unspoken rules that everyone in this building, the terrified student, the hostile old man, the overly friendly manager, had agreed to live by. Leave it alone. Mind your business. Pretend it's not happening. They weren't just afraid of the man in 4B. They were protecting him. They were all his accomplices. I was the rat in their maze, and they were all guarding the walls. I went back to my apartment, the sanctuary that was no longer a sanctuary. The silence was a physical presence. My apartment was a cage, but the entire building was the zoo. I was the exhibit, and everyone was watching. Fine. If they wanted a show, I'd give them one. I stormed into my living room. My hands found a stack of heavy art books on the coffee table. They were the last thing I'd unpacked. Thick, hardbound books filled with pictures of places that seemed a world away. Safe places. Without a second thought, I swept them off the table. They hit the hardwood floor with a tremendous, echoing crash. The sound was a violation, a deliberate act of chaos in a building that demanded silence. I stood there, panting, my chest heaving. I waited. I listened. Nothing from above, nothing from below, just the ringing in my own ears and the heavy, watchful silence. Did it work? Was that loud enough? My phone buzzed in my pocket. My blood turned to ice. I pulled it out with a hand that felt disconnected from my body. A new text message. From an unknown number. I opened it. Just a few words, a simple, polite request that felt more menacing than any threat. Please be quiet. You're bothering the neighbors. My breath caught in my throat. I stumbled to the window, my eyes scanning the courtyard below. The world outside was gray and overcast. Cars passed on the street. People walked their dogs. It was all so normal. Then I saw him. Mr. Henderson, the manager. He was standing on the lawn directly across from my building, next to a small dogwood tree. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there. He looked up, his eyes finding my window with an unnerving precision. He saw me looking at him. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just shook his head slowly, a single, disappointed gesture. You broke the rules. He knew. He was part of it. He was the zookeeper. My phone buzzed again. My thumb was numb as I tapped the screen. It was another message from the same unknown number. This time, it wasn't text. It was a video file. It was downloading. A cold dread, purer and more potent than anything I had ever felt, washed over me. I knew what this was going to be before I even saw it. It was the proof I had wanted, delivered as the ultimate punishment. The download finished. I pressed play. The video was shaky for a second, then it settled. The angle was from high up, near the ceiling, in the corner of my own living room. It was looking down at my sofa, my coffee table, my entire life laid bare. And there I was. On the screen, a tiny, furious version of myself stormed into the frame. I watched myself sweep the books off the table. I saw them crash to the floor. The timestamp in the corner of the video read just 30 seconds ago. The camera was here. Now. In the room with me. The phone slipped from my fingers, clattering onto the floor for the second time that day. I didn't care. My head snapped up, my eyes shooting to the corners of the ceiling, frantically searching for the tiny, black lens that was watching me, that was broadcasting my terror back to the monster who controlled this place. But I saw nothing, just plaster and shadows. He had placed a camera inside my apartment, and I had never even known. The show was over. The trap was sprung. He wasn't in the walls anymore. He was in the room. He was everywhere. My lungs burned. My throat was tight. A camera. Here. Now. The thought was a loop, a broken record scraping away inside my skull. He was watching me. He was watching my reaction to being watched. My head snapped up. Eyes scanning. The corners of the ceiling, where shadow met plaster. The top of the bookshelf. The inert, black screen of the television. Nothing. I saw nothing. But it was there. A tiny, black, unblinking eye. A pinprick in my reality, feeding my terror back to its source. The rational part of my brain, a small, screaming voice in a hurricane of panic, tried to take over. Smoke detector. That's where they put them in the movies. I dragged the coffee table under it, my bare feet sliding on the mess of books I'd thrown to the floor. I climbed up, my hand shaking. I fumbled with the plastic cover, tearing it off its mount. Wires dangled. A circuit board. A space for a 9-volt battery. No lens, no transmitter. Just a cheap, plastic fire alarm. I threw it to the floor. It shattered. The sound was small and pathetic. The vents. I ran to the wall, yanking the metal grate off. I plunged my hand into the dark, filthy opening, feeling the cold, greasy metal of the ductwork. My fingers swept every surface. Dust. A dead spider. Nothing else. My mind raced. What else? What else had power? The lamps. I tore the shades off, inspecting the sockets, the wiring, the power outlets. I got on my knees, my face inches from the wall, peering into the small black slots. The stereo receiver, the clock radio, the back of the cable box. I ripped them all away from the wall, tangled wires spilling onto the floor like guts. Every black screw, every LED light, every seam in the plastic was a potential hiding place. It was a manic, hopeless search. I was an animal in a high-tech trap, tearing at the bars, not realizing the cage was my own skin. I found nothing, and that was the worst part. The camera was so well hidden, so perfectly integrated, that it was invisible. My sanctuary wasn't just compromised, it had been built by the enemy. He knew this room better than I did. I had lived here for weeks, but he had been here forever. I collapsed back, my spine hitting the wall. I had to get out. Not just out of the room, but out of the city. This wasn't a fight I could win. This wasn't a mystery to be solved. This was an extermination, and I was the pest. Run. The thought was clean and sharp. The first clear thing I had thought in an hour. Run now. Don't pack. Just go. My laptop was on the small desk in the corner. A bus ticket. A train ticket. Anything heading anywhere. That was the plan. I stumbled over to the desk, my legs unsteady. I flipped the screen open. The machine whirred to life, waking from sleep mode. The desktop wallpaper appeared. A generic, blue-hued mountain range I'd never bothered to change. But something was different. In the upper left corner of the screen, there was a new icon. A folder. I hadn't put it there. My blood ran cold. I knew the name before I even focused on the text. I didn't want to read it, but my eyes were drawn to it, pulled by a force I couldn't fight. The folder was labeled, simply, Last Night. My hand froze over the trackpad. This was it. The bait. The next turn of the screw. He had watched me tear my apartment apart. He had let me exhaust myself. Now, he was offering a new game. A new piece of evidence. A new way to prove I was insane. Don't open it. Just get up and leave. Buy a ticket at the station. Leave the laptop. Leave everything. But I couldn't. I had to know. The need to see, to understand the exact shape of the monster hunting me, was stronger than my survival instinct. My finger trembled as I moved the cursor. It hovered over the icon for a second that stretched into an eternity. Then, with a soft, final click, I opened it. The folder contained a series of image files. Not just one. A row of them. 12. Backquote, 01_2am.jpg backquote. Backquote, 02_231am.jpg backquote. Backquote, 03_302am.jpg backquote. My heart was a hammer against my ribs, a dull, heavy thudding in my ears. I clicked on the first image. It filled the screen. It was me. I was in my bed, asleep. The angle was from the foot of the bed, low down, as if the camera were resting on the floor, looking up at me. The image was grainy, captured in the low light of the city glow, filtering through the window. In the photo, I was on my back, my mouth slightly open, utterly vulnerable. The timestamp in the photo's data confirmed it. 2 a.m. While I was dead to the world, he was documenting me. I felt a wave of nausea. My hand shook as I clicked the right arrow key, moving to the next image. Backquote 02_231am.jpg backquote. I had rolled onto my side, facing away from the camera. The sheet was tangled around my legs. The composition was the same. The same low, watchful angle. The same silent, patient observation. He wasn't just taking pictures. He was building a timeline of my helplessness. I clicked again. Backquote 03_302am.jpg. Backquote. On my other side now, facing the lens, my expression was slack, unaware. I looked pathetic. A lamb in a pen, waiting for the slaughter. Faster now. My finger became a blur, tapping the arrow key. Click. 3:30, a close-up, the camera somehow nearer. I could see the individual stubble on my chin. Click. 4 o'clock. I had thrown an arm over my head. Click. 4:30. The blanket was kicked halfway off the bed. Click. 5 o'clock. The first hints of gray morning light were touching the window blinds. He had been there all night. All night. Watching. Each photo was a stab. A violation so profound, it left me breathless. He hadn't just been in the apartment while I slept. He had been in the room, at the foot of my bed, moving around, setting up shots. From the floor, then closer. The sheer audacity of it was breaking my mind. This wasn't a ghost. A ghost doesn't operate a digital camera. This wasn't a delusion. Delusions don't create JPEG files with embedded time codes. This was a person. A meticulous, patient, human monster who had spent the night in my bedroom while I slept. I reached the 11th photo. Back quote. 6:01 a.m.jpg. Back quote. The light was stronger now. I was a lump under the covers, just the top of my head visible. One more to go. My finger hovered over the key. A part of me screamed to stop, to slam the laptop shut and throw it against the wall. But I had to see the end of the sequence. I had to see the final frame of the movie he had made of me. I pressed the key. The final image loaded. Back quote 12_6:30 a.m.jpg. Back quote. The image was brighter. The gray light of dawn filled the room, casting long shadows. I was still in the bed, on my side, my back to the camera. My left leg was out from under the covers, my foot dangling off the edge of the mattress. Everything looked normal for a fraction of a second. Then I saw it. Something was coming from the bottom right corner of the frame, from the deep shadow beside the bed, a place the dawn hadn't yet reached. It was a hand. It wasn't my hand. It was pale, bone white in the dim light. The fingers were long and thin, like a spider's legs. It was reaching. Slowly, deliberately. It was extending out of the darkness. It was reaching for my exposed foot. The fingers were slightly curled, the knuckle of the index finger crooked, as if it had been broken and healed wrong. It was just inches away from my ankle. It was about to touch me. I choked. A sound caught somewhere between a gasp and a sob. My stomach revolted, and I lurched forward, bile rising in my throat. I slammed the laptop shut with a violent crack. The screen went black, but the image was seared onto the inside of my eyelids, that pale, reaching hand. That crooked finger! I scrambled back from the desk, my chair tipping over and crashing to the floor. My back hit the opposite wall again. I slid down to the floor, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. My eyes were wide, staring at the foot of my own bed, now empty and bathed in the full, unforgiving light of day. It happened. It was real. He was there. He reached for me. My breath came in ragged, shallow bursts. I looked down at my own hands, my own feet, as if to confirm they were still mine. My gaze fell upon my left ankle, the same ankle that was hanging off the bed in the photograph. There, on my skin, was a mark. It was faint, a constellation of purplish-blue discolorations against my pale skin. It wasn't a random blotch, it was a shape. I leaned closer, my violently trembling hands propping me up. My blood turned to slush. It was the perfect, undeniable shape of a handprint. 4 faint marks for the fingers wrapped around the back of my ankle, and a single, darker spot on the front, right over the bone. The thumb. He hadn't just reached for me. He had touched me. He had held me. While I slept, that hand had closed around my ankle, leaving its signature on my flesh. The scar. The proof. The last of my sanity frayed and snapped. I didn't scream. The sound that came out of my throat was no longer human. It was a raw, animal noise of pure terror. The show wasn't over. It had just begun, and I was the star. The sound tore from my throat, raw and broken. A sound of an animal caught in a trap, a sound that didn't belong to me anymore. I was on the floor, my back scraped raw against the plaster, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. My eyes were locked on the bruise, the handprint, the goddamn perfect handprint on my ankle. He hadn't just watched, he hadn't just photographed, he had touched me. He had put his hand on my skin while I slept, helpless and unaware. He had held me. The thought was a physical violation, a worm of ice boring through my gut. Run. The command screamed in my skull, the same useless command as before. But where? Where could I go? He had been in my bedroom, he was on my laptop, he was in my head, he was under my skin. Running was just a change of scenery for his show. The cage wasn't the apartment anymore. It was me. Something shifted then. The terror didn't vanish. It changed. It was a liquid fear that had been sloshing around inside me, drowning me. Now it began to freeze, to harden. The violent shaking in my limbs began to subside, replaced by a rigid, cold tension. The animal sound in my throat died. My breathing was still a mess, but it was the breathing of a predator now, not prey. He wanted to drive me insane. He wanted to break me. He wanted me to run screaming to the police, babbling about ghosts and photos and bruises so they could look at me, at the wreckage of my apartment, and put me in a soft, quiet room. That was his game, fine. I wouldn't play anymore. There was only one move left on the board. Not running away, not hiding, not calling for help that would never come. I had to go to him. I had to go into 4B. The thought was clean and sharp, a shard of glass in the mess of my mind. It wasn't bravery. It was the last, desperate act of a man with nothing left to lose. My sanity was already gone. My safety was a joke. All I had left was the ending. And I would meet it on my feet. I would kick the goddamn door in myself. My eyes scanned the disaster of my living room. The overturned furniture, the shattered smoke alarm, the guts of my electronics. And then I remembered. A memory from that first day, hazy with the stress of moving. Henderson, the building manager, his face sagging with boredom, pressing a small, grimy key into my hand along with my own. "This one's for 4B, he'd mumbled. "The last guy kept locking himself out. We keep a spare with the tenant next door. That's you now. Just for emergencies. Don't lose it." I had scoffed. An emergency key for a vacant apartment? I'd tossed it into the back of the kitchen junk drawer, a forgotten piece of metal and a tangle of rubber bands and dead batteries. I was on my feet in a second. I didn't feel the floor. I didn't feel the ache in my back. I ripped the drawer open, its contents clattering. My fingers dug through the junk, frantic. Paper clips. A dried-out pen. An old packet of salt. There. My fingers closed around it. Cold, heavy, real. I pulled it out and held it in my trembling palm. It was an old-fashioned brass key, tarnished and plain. It looked harmless. It was the key to the monster's cage. Or maybe it was the key to mine. It didn't matter. It was my only way through the wall. I looked at the clock on the wall. 10:47 a.m. Night was his time. He owned the shadows. He moved through the darkness. I wouldn't fight him on his terms. I would do this in the flat, revealing light of day. I would do it when the building was at its most empty, a hollow shell of people off at their jobs. Midday. The wait was a new kind of hell. The adrenaline from the discovery was still burning through me, but now it had nowhere to go. It was a low electric hum under my skin. I had to channel it. I needed a plan. I needed a weapon. My eyes fell on the small toolbox I kept under the sink. I pulled it out. A hammer. Too clumsy. Pliers. Useless. Then I saw it. A small, black pry bar. About a foot long. Heavy steel. Good for leverage. Good for breaking things. Good for a skull, if it came to that. I gripped it. The weight felt good in my hand. Solid. Final. I went to the kitchen. My hands were steady now. I opened the knife block. The big chef's knife was too much. The bread knife, ridiculous. I took the utility knife. A 6-inch blade, sharp and simple. I didn't plan on using it, but holding it felt right. Pry bar in my left hand, knife in my right. I was a mockery of a soldier gearing up for battle. Now I watched. I went to my front door and pressed my eye to the peephole. The fisheye lens warped the hallway into a long, curved tunnel. Empty. Silent. The off-white walls, the faded maroon carpet. It looked so normal. It was a stage. My entire world shrank to that tiny circle of glass. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I listened. Every sound was magnified. Every creak and groan of the old building a potential threat. 11:15. I heard a door open down the hall. Mrs. Gable, from 4F. I recognized the jingle of her massive chain of keys and the shuffling of her slippers. I watched her distorted figure waddle to the elevator. The doors slid open with a tired sigh. She got in, and they slid shut. The numbers above the elevator door lit up. 4, 3, 2, 1. The hum faded. Good. One less witness. One less variable. The silence that followed was heavy. It pressed in on me. My heart was a drum against my ribs. A slow, heavy beat. Thump, 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 thump. The pry bar was slick with sweat in my hand. The knife handle felt fused to my fingers. This is what it feels like, I thought. The moment before everything changes or everything ends. My mind raced. What would I find? The ghost of a dead tenant? Would the door open to an empty, dusty room, proving I was truly, irrevocably insane? Or would I find him? The man with the camera. The man with the pale hand and the crooked finger. What would he look like? Would he be waiting for me? A loud clang from the stairwell made me jump, my body tensing. I flattened myself against the door, my heart seizing. Just the pipes. The building settling. Every nerve was a live wire. 12:02. Time. The building was as quiet as a tomb. I listened one last time. Nothing. Just the faint hum of the building's electricity. No TVs, no voices, no footsteps. But the silence wasn't empty. It was watchful. I could feel him on the other side of the wall. Maybe he was listening for me too. A perfect, horrible symmetry. Then I heard it. The sound I'd been waiting for. The ding of the elevator arriving on my floor. I pressed my eye to the peephole. The doors slid open. Henderson. The landlord. He lumbered out, carrying a small toolbox, and headed not towards me, but towards the stairwell at the far end of the hall. I heard the heavy metal door of the stairs open with a loud groan, and then the sound of his heavy work boots clomping down. He was gone. This was it. The window was open. It wouldn't last long. My body moved before my brain could raise another objection. It was pure instinct. I twisted the lock on my own door. It made a soft snick. I pulled the door open, just enough to slip out. The air in the hallway was cool and still. I didn't close my door. No time. 3 steps. That's all it took. 3 silent steps on the faded carpet to the door of 4B. It looked just like my door. Same cheap wood veneer, same tarnished brass numbers. It was a mirror image. My hand was shaking again, but I didn't care. I raised the old, grimy key. For a second, I thought it wouldn't fit. That this was all a delusion. That Henderson gave me the wrong key. A useless piece of metal. I pushed it into the lock. It slid in. Perfectly. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of dust and anxiety. My gaze darted left, then right. The hallway was still empty. I gripped the key and turned. The sound of the tumblers shifting inside the lock was the loudest thing I had ever heard. A series of metallic clicks that echoed in the silence. A sound that screamed, "I am here." I froze, my whole body rigid, waiting for a door to fly open, for a voice to shout. Nothing. I turned the knob. It was stiff. I pushed. The door opened with a low, soft creak, the sound of disuse. It swung inward into blackness. I expected a wave of stale, dusty air, the smell of a place that had been sealed for months. The smell of decay. That's not what hit me. The door swung open, and the darkness wasn't complete. A faint, weak light was coming from a room deeper inside, and the smell, it wasn't dust. It wasn't rot. It was the smell of freshly brewed coffee. My boots were silent on the thin, cheap rug. The air didn't move. The pry bar was suddenly slick in my left hand, the utility knife a cold, foreign object in my right. This wasn't a vacant apartment. A vacant apartment doesn't smell like a morning routine. It smells like death. The death of time, of memory, of air. This smelled like life. I took a step, then another. My heart was a fist, hammering against the inside of my ribs. The layout was a mirror of my own. A short hallway opening into a living space. A doorway to the left, probably a bedroom. Another to the right, the kitchen. The faint light was coming from the main room. I followed it, my back scraping against the wall. The weapons in my hands felt useless, like toys. You bring a pry bar for a ghost, for a locked door. What do you bring for a man who drinks coffee while he ruins your life? I reached the end of the hall and peered around the edge. My breath caught, a dry little hitch in my throat. The room was Spartan, clean. There was a cheap metal folding table against the far wall. A single black office chair. A sleeping bag and a pillow were rolled up neatly in a corner. An open laptop sat on the table, its screen glowing. A temporary command center. That's what this was. Not a home, a base of operations. My eyes swept the room, cataloging the wrongness. The absolute, clinical tidiness of it all. This wasn't a home. No pictures, no clutter, no life, just a function. A single, terrible function, and I was at the center of it. Then I saw the other screen. Next to the laptop was a larger monitor, maybe 24 inches, and it was alive. It was split into a grid of small, silent moving pictures. A security feed. My blood went cold. It didn't just go cold, it felt like it solidified into a block of ice in my veins. The top left square was my living room. I could see the overturned coffee table, the guts of the smoke alarm I'd ripped from the ceiling. It was a live feed. The top right was my bedroom, my unmade bed, the window, a perfect, clear shot of the space where I was supposed to be safe. My sanctuary. Violated. Exposed. Another square showed the hallway outside our doors, the same warped fisheye view from my own peephole. He could watch me come and go. He could watch my every move before I even put the key in my lock. My stomach churned. A camera must be hidden in the light fixture. Or the ceiling tile. There were more. 4, 5, 6 feeds. One was aimed at my front door from a low angle, hidden in the baseboard molding across the hall. He could see if I had guests. He could see the shoes they wore. And the last one made me want to vomit. It was a shaky, slightly fuzzy view, looking down. It took me a second to place it. It was from the perspective of the potted ficus on my small balcony, a tiny pinhole camera, nestled amongst the fake leaves, watching me through the sliding glass door. Every time I thought I was getting a breath of fresh air, he was there, watching, always watching. The entire architecture of my life was laid out on that screen. A prison I hadn't even known I was in. The ghost, the whispers, the disappearing gifts, it was all just noise. A distraction. Theatrics to keep me looking at the ceiling for spirits while he watched me from 6 different angles. The gaslighting wasn't just to make me feel crazy. It was to keep me from looking for the cameras. I felt a surge of something hot and black in my chest. Rage. It burned away the cold fear for a moment, leaving a core of pure, incandescent fury. This son of a bitch. This meticulous, patient son of a bitch. I stepped fully into the room, my knuckles white on the pry bar. I wanted to smash it all. The screen, the laptop, the whole fucking operation. But my eyes caught something else. The wall next to the table. It wasn't bare. It was a shrine. A shrine to me. There was a large corkboard, the kind you see in a school or an office. It was covered, plastered with photographs. Not just the ones from my laptop. Dozens more. Me, walking to my car in the morning, a telephoto shot from a window across the street. Me, at the grocery store, pushing a cart, frowning at a carton of milk. Me, sitting in a coffee shop 2 towns over, talking on my phone, oblivious. Me, through my own bedroom window at night, backlit by the lamp, reading a book. Each photo was pinned neatly to the board. Some had notes scribbled underneath in a tight, precise script. 7:15 a.m. departs for work. 8:32 p.m. returns with groceries. Note, avoids eye contact with neighbors. My life wasn't just being watched. It was being studied. Dissected. Below the photos was a whiteboard. On it, a flowchart. My weekly routine mapped out with colored markers. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Gym, 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Tuesday, takeout. Usually Thai. Weekend, erratic. Sleeps late. Prone to long periods of inactivity. This wasn't a stalker's crush. It wasn't a random obsession. This was a project, a hunting strategy. Every move was calculated. Every single paranormal event was a calibrated chess move, designed to isolate me, to make me doubt myself, to break me down piece by piece until I was nothing but a wreck of a man. Easy to, what? What was the end game? What did he want? The sheer, painstaking effort of it all was what truly terrified me. The dedication. The commitment. A ghost is a chaotic force. This was cold, calculated, human intelligence. an evil that made coffee in the morning and charted your psychological destruction before lunch. My knees felt weak. I leaned a hand against the wall to steady myself. The pry bar felt impossibly heavy. The knife was a joke. I was outmatched. This wasn't a fight, it was an extermination. And then I heard it. The sound that snapped every nerve in my body to attention. The sound that vaporized the rage and the shock and left only pure, white-hot survival instinct. A key sliding into the lock of the apartment's front door. Click. He was back. There was no time, no thought. Only a primal animal command screamed through my brain. Hide! My eyes shot around the Spartan room. Nowhere. The table? Too open. Under the sleeping bag? A child's move. The door to my left. The bedroom. It was my only chance. I didn't run. I moved in a silent, desperate crouch, my boots making no sound on the thin carpet. Pry bar in one hand, knife in the other. I felt like a cornered rat. The front door's knob was turning, a slow, metallic groan. I slipped through the bedroom doorway. It was even more Spartan than the main room. A mattress on the floor, a single wooden crate for a nightstand, and a closet. A cheap sliding closet, its louvered door slightly ajar. I didn't hesitate. I slid inside, pulling the door almost shut, leaving only a hairline crack to see through. The space was tight, smelling of cheap wood and nothing else. It was empty. Of course it was. He didn't live here. He worked here. I hunched down in the darkness, trying to control my breathing. My heart was a wild bird, beating itself to death against my ribs. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth, stifling the ragged gasps of air. Don't breathe. Don't make a sound. Don't exist. The front door creaked open. Heavy footsteps on the rug. The sound of the door closing with a soft, final thump. He was in. He was in here with me. Through the crack in the closet door, I could see a sliver of the bedroom. The mattress on the floor. The far wall. I couldn't see him, but I could hear him. The rustle of a jacket being taken off, the soft thud of a bag being set down on the floor in the main room. Then, a voice. A calm, familiar voice that made every hair on my body stand on end. He was on the phone. No, everything's fine, the voice said. It was relaxed, casual, like a man calling home after a day at the office. Yeah, I just got back. No issues. A pause. I held my breath until my lungs burned. My eyes were glued to the crack, straining to see, to understand. The subject? The voice chuckled. A low, dry sound. Let's just say we're entering the final phase. The paranoia is peaking nicely. Last night's little addition to his bedroom seems to have worked perfectly. He's right on the edge. My mind reeled. Last night's addition. The photo. The bruise. Yeah, another day or two of this, the voice continued, moving closer. I could hear his footsteps approaching the bedroom door. My heart stopped. He'll either have a complete breakdown and get himself committed, or he'll get desperate. Either way, the apartment will be empty for me by the end of the week. The plan is working perfectly. The prey is about to walk right into the trap. The voice. The voice. Where did I know that voice? It was so common, so unremarkable. The kind of voice you hear every day and forget instantly. The casual cadence, the slightly bored tone. And then he walked past the open bedroom door, and I saw his profile for a single, soul-shattering second. The sagging jowls. The thinning gray hair. The drab tan work shirt. It was Henderson, the building manager. The man who had given me the key. The man who had mumbled about the last tenant locking himself out. The man whose heavy boots I'd heard clomping down the stairs not an hour ago. The trap wasn't the cameras. It wasn't the psychological warfare. The trap was me being here. Now. In his closet. The world dissolved into a smear of silent, screaming horror. I was in the monster's cage. And he had just locked the door behind him. The universe inside the closet was Henderson. The name echoed in the vacuum of my skull. Not a name, a function. Building manager, The guy with the keys. The guy with the access. The guy who saw the lonely new tenant and didn't see a person, but an empty space to be filled with whatever horror he wanted. Every interaction I'd had with him replayed in my mind, but the film was tainted now. Sick. His friendly nod in the hallway. His bored sigh about the previous tenant. His offer to help with the cable guy. Every word was a lie. Every gesture was a piece of the trap. A trap I had just walked into. My lungs burned. I had forgotten to breathe. I sucked in a shallow, silent gasp that tasted of dust and cheap pine. The darkness was total, except for that single, vertical crack of light from the door. My eye was pressed to it. That sliver of the world was my entire reality. I heard the creak of the office chair in the other room. He had sat down. The prey. He had called me. A project. The calm, business-like tone of his phone call was worse than any scream. He wasn't a frenzied maniac. He was a professional. This was his job. Ruining me was his 9 to 5. A soft click-click of a mouse. My blood went cold. He was at the computer. At the screens. My screens. My life. Through the crack, I could see a fraction of the larger monitor. A small, black and white box flickering. It was the feed from the hallway. The fisheye view. Then, the view changed. He was cycling through them. He was reviewing the tapes. My stomach twisted. I saw a jerky, handheld view. It took me a second to realize what I was seeing. It was my own perspective. It was footage from the camera hidden on me while I was breaking in, only he wasn't watching it, he was fast-forwarding through a recording. No, not a camera on me. It was one of his. The one in the ficus. He was watching the feed from the balcony, which had caught my shadow moving inside when I first entered his apartment. He was checking how I got in. Seeing my method. His voice came again, this time without the phone. Just him talking to himself. Or to me. Pry bar, he murmured, a sound of distant amusement. Smart, messy, but smart. He knew. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't just back from an errand. He had been watching, maybe on his phone. He had watched me jimmy his lock. He had watched me step inside. He let me discover it all. He let me see the cameras, the shrine, the whole sick operation. He wanted me to know the scale of it before he... What? What was the plan now? I saw a sliver of him lean back in the chair. He tilted his head. He was watching the live feed now. The feed from a camera inside this very apartment. A tiny pinhole somewhere. He was looking at an empty room. He was waiting. He knew I was here. The thought didn't creep in. It detonated. All the pieces slammed together. The casual phone call, ending right after he got inside. The review of the footage. The self-assured calm. It was a performance. All of it. For me. He wasn't just a predator. He was a dramatist. And this was the third act. I tightened my grip on the pry bar. The metal was slick with my sweat. The utility knife in my other hand felt flimsy. A child's toy. My heart hammered. A frantic, trapped thing. Every instinct screamed at me to stay frozen. To not exist. But he already knew. He was just toying with me. Drawing it out. He was enjoying this. The power. The absolute control. The chair creaked as he stood up. My body went rigid. I held my breath, my ears straining, trying to place the sound of his footsteps. They were soft on the cheap rug. Deliberate. One footfall. Then another. Getting closer. He wasn't going to the kitchen. He wasn't going to the front door. He was coming to the bedroom. He was coming for me. My mind raced. A frantic slideshow of impossible escapes. The window? No, he'd hear it open. There's no other way out. This is it. This is the cage. The fight. Right here. Right now. His heavy shape filled the bedroom doorway, a dark silhouette against the glow from the other room. He stood there for a long moment, a dark, silent monolith. I could feel his gaze sweeping the small room. The mattress on the floor. The crate. The closet. He knew. He took a step into the room, then another. My world shrank to the narrow space of the closet, the smell of my own fear. His boots were silent on the carpet. He stopped, just a few feet from the closet door. The silence stretched, tight and thin. I could hear my pulse in my ears, a thick, wet drum beat. Thump-thump, thump-thump. Then he did something that shattered my sanity. He reached out a hand. Knock, knock, knock. 3 sharp, distinct raps against the louvered door, right in front of my face. It was a sound of finality, a polite, civilized sound that carried the weight of the grave. "I know you're in there, John." Henderson's voice was low, conversational, almost gentle, the voice he used when asking if my mail had arrived. Game over. There was no more hiding, no more strategy. There was only the animal brain, the cornered rat, the fight reflex. A scream tore from my throat, a raw, ragged sound of pure rage and terror. I didn't pull the door open. I kicked it. I threw my entire body weight forward, and the cheap wood splintered and exploded outward. I burst out of the darkness and into the dim light of the room, a screeching mess of adrenaline. I swung the pry bar, not aiming, just lashing out. A wild, desperate arc meant to cave in his skull. Henderson was older, but he wasn't slow. He grunted in surprise, a sharp exhalation of air, and took a quick step back. The iron bar whistled through the air where his head had been a split second before, smashing into the wall with a dull thud that sent plaster dust puffing into the air. He stumbled, but he didn't fall. His eyes were wide, not with fear, but with a kind of excited, manic energy. A hunter who finally sees the bear charge. In that instant, I saw he wasn't just some doughy, middle-aged man. There was a wiry strength to him, a coiled tension in his shoulders. He recovered his balance instantly. I didn't give him a chance. I lunged again, the utility knife held out in a clumsy reverse grip. I just wanted to make him bleed, to make him stop, to make him reel. He batted my knife hand away with a thick forearm, a block that sent a jolt of pain all the way up to my shoulder. The knife flew from my slick fingers and skittered under the mattress. He was strong. Much stronger than he looked. He grabbed the front of my shirt with one hand, his knuckles digging into my collarbone. His other hand seized my wrist, the one holding the pry bar. His grip was like iron. We were locked together, a grunting, struggling mass of limbs. His face was inches from mine. I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. His eyes were alight with a sick, ecstatic fire. "There you are," he hissed, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. "There's the real you." I twisted, trying to break his grip, using my knee to slam into his thigh. He grunted but didn't let go. We staggered across the small room, a clumsy, violent dance. My back hit the wall hard. The impact knocked the wind out of me. He used the momentum, pushing all his weight into me, pinning me against it. The pry bar was trapped between our bodies, useless. He was smiling, truly smiling, like he had waited for this moment his entire life. I bucked, thrashing my head forward, trying to smash my forehead into his nose. He jerked his head back, dodging it. With a roar of frustration, I shoved with all my might. We broke apart, stumbling in opposite directions. He staggered backwards, his arms flailing for balance. And then he crashed into the wall next to the main room's entryway. The wall with the corkboard. There was a loud crack as his weight hit it, the sound of cheap fiberboard ripping from its moorings. The whole thing tilted, and then fell. The corkboard, the shrine to my life, came crashing down onto the floor with a cascade of rustling paper and the soft clatter of dozens of thumbtacks. I gasped for air, my eyes fixed on him. He was on the floor, tangled with the board, pushing himself up. I still had the pry bar. This was my chance. I lunged. But I stopped. My brain registered what my eyes were seeing, and the input short-circuited my every nerve. The fall had dislodged everything. The photos of me, the meticulously typed notes, the color-coded flowchart of my life, they were scattered across the floor like dead leaves. But the board wasn't empty underneath. There was another layer, an older layer. Pinned beneath my life was someone else's. Dozens of other photos, faces I'd never seen. All men. One was in his late 20s, maybe, with glasses and a nervous smile, photographed getting into a dented Toyota. Another was older, balding, captured carrying a bag of groceries. A third looked like a student, a backpack slung over his shoulder, walking on a college campus. They all had the same look, the look I saw in the mirror every morning. A little lost, a little lonely, a transient. They were all him, they were all me. And on every single photograph, cutting across each face, was a thick, brutal mark drawn in a red permanent marker, a red X. My project wasn't the first. I wasn't the endgame. I was just the next one on the list. The pry bar slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the floor. The sound was a million miles away. Henderson was getting to his feet, but I wasn't looking at him anymore. I was looking at the faces, at the red ink. A graveyard pinned to a corkboard. The trap wasn't just for me. This apartment, this entire building, it was a processing plant. And I had just seen the final product. My breath hitched. A useless little gasp in a room suddenly devoid of oxygen. The faces. God, the faces. They weren't just pictures. They were ghosts. The man with the cheap glasses, squinting into a sun I'd never see. The balding one with a plastic bag of what looked like potatoes. His mouth a thin line of weary resignation. The kid in the university sweatshirt, caught mid-stride, blissfully unaware he was walking straight into a spider's web. Each one was a story, a life. Each one ended with a thick, brutal X slashed in red ink. A final, vulgar period on a sentence I was only now beginning to read. This wasn't a shrine to me. It was a file cabinet. I wasn't a project. I was just paperwork. The latest entry. A new folder on a crowded, blood-soaked shelf. My mind reeled back to Henderson's bored sigh on my first day. The last guy? Left in a hurry. You know how it is. I knew now. Oh, I knew. The pry bar felt impossibly heavy, then impossibly light as it slipped from my nerveless fingers. It hit the wooden floor with a flat, hollow clack that echoed in the sudden quiet. Henderson pushed himself to his feet, brushing dust and thumbtacks from his shirt with an unnerving calm. He wasn't even breathing hard. He looked at the chaos on the floor, the collage of my stolen life mixed with the remains of his previous victims, and a slow, thin smile spread across his lips. It was the smile of a teacher watching a difficult student finally solve a problem. There it is, he said, his voice a low, satisfied rumble. The moment the penny drops. He took a step towards me. I scrambled backwards on my hands and heels, my body acting on pure animal instinct. My eyes darted from his face to the gallery of the dead on the floor. My life wasn't special. My fear wasn't unique. It was a formula. A recipe he had perfected over and over again. He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. You think you're special, John? Because you write your little stories? Because you're so introspective? He spat the word out like it was a piece of rotten food. You're all the same, every single one of you. He gestured with a sweep of his hand at the scattered photos. You moved to a big city looking for something new, running from something old. You're lonely, you're disconnected. You're an empty canvas waiting for a brush. He took another step, closing the distance. You're just data, an experiment, a case study in the architecture of fear. He was stronger than he looked. Much stronger. Before I could process it, he lunged, not with a punch, but with a solid, powerful shove. The heel of his hand caught me square in the chest. It felt like being hit by a small car. The air exploded from my lungs. I went down hard, my head cracking against the floorboards. Stars flickered at the edge of my vision. I lay there, gasping, trying to pull air back into my body. He stood over me, a great dark shape blocking the light from the other room. But you got one thing wrong, John, he said, his voice dropping, becoming almost conspiratorial. Right from the very start, one very important variable you miscalculated. I didn't have the breath to ask. I just stared up at him, my mind a screaming void. He didn't look down at me. Instead, he turned his head and looked at the wall that separated his apartment from mine, the wall that had been the source of all the knocks, the muffled music, the whispers, the source of my slow descent into madness. He pointed a thick finger at the cheap painted drywall. The ghost you were so desperately trying to find, he said, a note of genuine amusement in his voice. The presence you felt? The disappearing gifts? She's real. The words didn't make sense. My brain refused to assemble them into a coherent thought. I was caught between a human monster and a paranormal one. A war on two fronts. Henderson took a step towards the wall, his heavy boots making the floorboards groan. He reached out his hand, not in violence, but with a strange, almost gentle deliberation. He raised his knuckles to the plaster. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was exactly the same, the polite, neighborly rap that had tormented me for weeks. But this time, it wasn't a question. It was a summons. "Right, Eliza?" he called out, his voice sharp, commanding. "Show our friend he isn't alone." For a long, terrible second, there was only silence. The silence of the grave. The silence I had craved for so long. And then, from the other side of the wall, from my apartment, it came. It wasn't a human sound. It was a wail. A long, thin, tortured sound that clawed its way through the plaster and wood, a sound of pure, undiluted agony and loss. It vibrated in my teeth, in my bones. It was the sound of a soul being scraped raw. The air in the room went cold, not just cool. Cold, a deep, biting, unnatural cold that sucked the warmth from my skin and made my breath plume in front of my face. The light from the other room seemed to dim, to change color, turning a sick grayish blue. I pushed myself up onto my elbows, my eyes locked on the wall, my skin prickled with a million tiny needles. The paint on the wall began to darken, not like a shadow was falling on it, but like the color was bleeding out from within. A patch of darkness, nebulous and shifting, began to coalesce. It swirled like ink in water, resolving itself into a shape. A human shape. A woman. She was tall and thin. A wraith made of shadow and grief. Her form was indistinct, her edges blurred, but the desperation was horribly clear. She was inside the wall, a part of it, yet separate. She pressed against it from the other side, her shadowy hands flattening against the surface, her face a mask of silent screaming, her spectral eyes, two pits of deeper darkness, fixed on me. She was reaching for me, trying to get to me. Henderson watched the spectacle with the detached interest of a scientist observing a chemical reaction. He had a faint, proud smile on his face. "She was the tenant before the last guy," he said casually, as if discussing the weather. "Got a little too curious, a little too close to the truth. Just like you." The spectral woman, Eliza, thrashed against her prison of plaster and paint, her silent screams tearing at the edges of my sanity. She wasn't the threat. She was a warning, a failed alarm system. Henderson saw my focus. He saw my terror, my distraction. And he moved. In the fraction of a second that my attention was glued to the apparition, he turned away from the wall. His hand disappeared behind his back, towards a tool belt I hadn't even noticed he was wearing. When his hand came back, it was holding something heavy and dark. A hammer. I saw the glint of the dim light on the polished steel of its head. I saw the familiar curve of its claw. He took a single, fluid step forward and swung. The hammer arced through the cold air, a dark pendulum coming for my skull. There was no thought, no plan, only a spike of pure adrenaline that bypassed my brain and fired directly into my muscles. I threw myself sideways, rolling across the floor in a clumsy, desperate scramble. Crack thump. The hammer missed my head by inches, crashing into the floorboards where my skull had just been. The impact was sickeningly solid. Wood splintered. The entire floor shook. I felt the vibration through my hands as I scrambled away, crab-walking backwards, my heart trying to beat its way out of my ribcage. Henderson grunted in frustration, yanking the hammer free from the deep gouge it had left in the floor. He turned, raising it again, his eyes glowing with that same ecstatic fire. But my mind had caught on something. I stared at the weapon in his hand. My brain, slow and clumsy, was putting pieces together. The hammer. The heavy, well-used claw hammer. I had seen it before. It was the same one from the small, cluttered maintenance room in the basement. The one hanging on the pegboard next to the spare light bulbs and the industrial-sized bottles of bleach. Henderson's hammer. The building manager's tool. And as he raised it into the dim gray light, my eyes caught a detail I had missed in the basement. A detail that made every organ in my body turn to ice. On the flat side of the hammer's head, near the striking face, was a dark, ugly stain. It was old, brownish red, not rust. The stain was deep in the pores of the steel, a permanent part of the tool. It was dried blood. The hammer, the blood, the basement. My mind didn't form thought so much as fire off single disconnected words like flares in a black void. He'd used it before. On the man with the cheap glasses, on the balding one with the potatoes, on the kid in the sweatshirt, and now me. The blade of the hammer was buried deep in the wood, a silver fang dripping with the memory of past lives. Henderson grunted, yanking it free. The sound of wood giving way was loud in the sudden freezing air. He was a slab of granite blocking the only light, the only way out. Behind him, the wall howled without a sound. The inkblot woman, Eliza, was throwing herself against the inside of the plaster, her silent mouth stretched into a perfect O of agony. The lights in the room began to strobe, not a flicker, a violent on-off spasm that turned the scene into a slideshow of horrors. Henderson. Hammer raised. Darkness. Eliza. Hands flattened against the wall. Darkness. The scattered photos of the dead. Darkness. The floor beneath me began to vibrate, low and deep, like a truck idling just outside the building. But we were 4 stories up. A framed photo, a smiling family I'd never know, shook itself loose from the wall and shattered on the floor. Henderson flinched, his head turning for a fraction of a second toward the sound. It was the only opening I would get. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't a plan. It was just instinct. My body moved before my brain gave it permission. I lunged, not away, but sideways, toward the rickety desk where he'd assembled his trophies. My hands closed around the bulky shape of an old CRT monitor. It was heavy, awkward. I heaved it up, my muscles screaming. He turned back, his eyes widening as he saw me, a cornered animal with its clumsy weapon. He opened his mouth to say something, a curse or a threat. He never got it out. I swung the monitor in a wide, desperate arc. The sound was not what I expected. It wasn't a clean crash. It was a dull, wet thump followed by the implosion of glass and plastic. The screen caved in against the side of his head. He staggered back, a thick grunt forced from his lungs. He didn't fall. He just stumbled, one hand flying up to his temple, his eyes glazed with surprise and pain. The hammer dropped from his other hand, clattering against the boards. I didn't wait. I didn't check for damage. I just ran. My legs pumped, my socked feet slipping on the polished floor. I burst through the doorway of 4B and into the dim, stale air of the hallway. My lungs burned. The door to my own apartment, 4A, was right there. Safety. Home. It was a lie. There was no safety there. The ghost was in there. The monster was behind me. Down. My first thought was to go down. To the lobby. To the street. But I could hear him recovering behind me, a furious, wounded roar. He was a bull. He was stronger than me, and the straight shot down the main staircase was a death trap. He'd catch me. So I went up. My feet slapped against the wooden stairs, the sound echoing in the narrow well. Up. Up. 2 steps at a time. My breath came in ragged sobs. I risked a glance over my shoulder. He was out of the apartment now, lumbering into the hall. He saw me. He didn't shout again. He just started moving, grabbing the banister and pulling his heavy frame up the stairs after me. He was faster than he looked. The 5th floor. The landing was small, lit by a single fly-speck bulb. There were only 2 doors, the one to the roof access, chained and padlocked. The other one. The girl's apartment. The student. I hammered on her door with both fists. I didn't care about the noise. I wanted noise. I wanted the whole world to hear. Help! Please, open the door! Help me! My voice was raw, thin. He's trying to kill me! Please! I could hear his heavy footsteps on the stairs now, a steady rhythmic thump, thump, thump. He wasn't running. He was hunting. He knew I was trapped. A noise from inside the apartment, the scrape of a peephole cover being moved. Silence. Then, the metallic rattle of a chain lock being slid. The door opened a crack, just a sliver of yellow light cutting into the hallway's gloom. A woman's eye, wide and blue, peered out at me. She was young, maybe 22. She looked terrified of me, of the wild-eyed man screaming and pounding on her door. Please, I gasped, leaning my forehead against the cool wood. You have to help me. He has a hammer. Her eye flickered. Confusion warred with fear. She didn't look at me anymore. Her gaze drifted past my shoulder. down the stairs. The fear won. It wasn't just fear. It was something else. A kind of horrified recognition. Her eye widened until I could see the whole circle of it. Her mouth opened in a small, silent gasp. She didn't say a word. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Go away." Nothing. Click. Slam. The chain was re-engaged. The door slammed shut in my face. The deadbolt shot home with a final, booming finality. Hope died. It just went out, like a blown-out candle. I was completely, utterly alone. I turned. Henderson stood at the top of the stairs, not even breathing hard. He had the hammer back in his hand. He wasn't smiling anymore. His face was a mask of cold fury. A trickle of blood ran from his temple, matting his gray hair. He took one step onto the landing, then another. The space felt impossibly small. It was a cage. My back was against the student's locked door. No way up. No way down. My eyes darted around, searching for anything. A weapon. An escape. And then I saw it. Bolted to the wall, right next to the door. A fire extinguisher. Bright red. A beacon in the grimy hallway. He saw me look at it. A low chuckle rumbled in his chest. "Go on," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "A case study. Fight or flight. What will it be, John?" He took another step. He was 10 feet away. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grasp the cold metal cylinder. I fumbled with the bracket, my fingers like fat, useless sausages. It came free with a scrape of metal on metal. It was heavier than the monitor. Dense. Solid. I held it in front of me like a shield. He was 5 feet away. He raised the hammer. The dim light caught the dried blood on the steel. The pin. I had to pull the pin. It was a small metal ring. My thumb couldn't get a purchase. My fingers were slick with sweat. He was taking his time, savoring it. He wanted to see the look in my eyes. My nail caught the edge of the ring. I ripped it out. It flew off into the darkness. He lunged. I squeezed the handle. A violent, deafening hiss erupted from the nozzle. A thick, white cloud of carbon dioxide exploded into the space between us, instantly swallowing him. It wasn't just a cloud. It was a force. It hit him with the power of a fist. He screamed, a choked, gargling sound as the freezing chemical filled his mouth and lungs. The white blast obscured everything. I couldn't see him. I could only hear him choking, gagging, blinded, and suffocating. I didn't stop. I kept my thumbs clamped down on the handle and I pushed forward, using the extinguisher like a battering ram. I made contact with a solid, yielding mass. Him. He stumbled backward from the force, his feet tangling at the edge of the top step. I screamed, a wordless sound of pure adrenaline and terror, and shoved with every ounce of strength I had left. He went over. It wasn't like in the movies. There was no long, dramatic fall, just a series of sickening, wet thuds. A heavy, rolling weight tumbling down the wooden staircase. Thump, crack. Thump, thump, thud. A final, heavier crash as he hit the landing on the floor below. Then, silence. A silence more terrifying than the noise. The cloud of CO2 swirled and dissipated, stinging my eyes and nose. I stood there, panting, the heavy extinguisher still in my hands. I didn't look. I couldn't look. I dropped the extinguisher. It rang against the floor. I ran. Down the stairs, past the 4th floor landing, I saw him. A crumpled heap of limbs at the bottom of the flight lying twisted against the wall. His head was at an angle that wasn't right. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. I didn't slow down. I vaulted over his legs and kept running, down past the 3rd floor, the 2nd. My body was a machine built for one purpose: escape. The lobby. The heavy glass doors. I hit the push bar with my shoulder and burst out into the night. The city air was cool and damp. It tasted like freedom. I stumbled onto the sidewalk, my legs giving out from under me. I fell to my knees on the dirty concrete, gulping in air, my whole body shaking in violent, uncontrollable spasms. The sounds of the city washed over me, a distant siren, the rumble of traffic, The murmur of people I couldn't see. Normal sounds. Real sounds. After a minute, or maybe an hour, I forced myself to look back. I looked up at the building. It was just a brick box like any other. Anonymous. Silent. My eyes found the 4th floor, the windows for apartment 4B. The lights were off now. The window was just a black square. And then, a shape formed in the darkness. It was her, Eliza. She wasn't the frantic, screaming thing from the wall. She was standing calmly in the center of the window, a silhouette against the deeper black of the room. She looked down at me, her form clear and steady. The distance was too great to see her face, but I felt her gaze. It wasn't menacing. It wasn't accusatory. It was finished. Slowly, deliberately, she gave a single, small nod. And then, like smoke on the wind, she dissolved. The window was empty again. Just a black square in a wall of brick. He was gone. She was gone. But I was still there, on my knees on a city sidewalk, and I knew, with a certainty that froze my soul, that I would be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life. Weeks. That's how long it had been. Or maybe it was a month. The days bled into one another, gray and smudged. I was in a new place now, a shoebox on the other side of the city, anonymous, clean. The walls were thin and painted a color called Landlord's Hope. There were no friendly neighbors, no one left gifts. That was a rule I had made for myself. No contact. The nightmares were the worst part. They weren't about the fall. They were about the sounds. The wet thump of the monitor. The rolling crashes down the stairs. And the silence afterward. I'd wake up with my own screams stuck in my throat, my cheap sheets soaked with sweat. My heart would hammer against my ribs, a trapped bird trying to break free. The cops had been to see me. Twice. A detective named Miller, a tired man with coffee stains on his tie. He asked questions. I gave answers. My voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. They had Henderson. They'd found things in the basement, behind a false wall. Things that belonged to the man with the glasses, the one with the potatoes, the kid in the sweatshirt. They called me a survivor. A victim. They didn't know the half of it. They didn't know about her. I never told them about Eliza. How could I? The ghost in the wall told me he was a killer. They'd have put me in a different kind of box, one with softer walls. So I kept my mouth shut. I drank. I didn't sleep. I just waited for the sun to come up. Today, there was a box. It was outside my door when I came back from buying cigarettes. Just sitting there on the worn welcome mat. It was small. Brown cardboard, taped shut with clear packing tape. No return address. No stamp. Someone had placed it there. My blood went cold. I stared at it. It wasn't a gift. It was a threat. My mind started firing off questions. Who knew I lived here? I hadn't told anyone. Not work. Not the few friends I had left. Only Detective Miller. Could it be from him? No. He'd call. This was different. This was quiet. This was like before. I backed away from my own door. My hand hovered over my phone. Call Miller. Tell him what? That I got a package. He'd think I was crazy. He already looked at me with pity in his eyes. Don't be an idiot, John. It's probably a mistake. Delivered to the wrong apartment. Or some free sample crap. I forced a breath into my lungs. It hitched on the way down. I nudged the box with the toe of my shoe. It was light. It didn't rattle. I listened. Nothing. Just the hum of the old refrigerator inside my apartment. The silence from the box was louder. Finally, with my heart pounding a sick rhythm against my ears, I bent down. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and locked it again. The deadbolt made a loud, satisfying thwack. I carried the box into the kitchen and set it on the counter, as if it were a bomb. I stood there for a long time, just looking at it. It was an intrusion, a violation of the sterile, empty space I had tried to build around myself. My hands shook. I needed a drink. I poured a glass of whiskey, the cheap stuff, and drank it down in one go. The burn in my throat was a welcome distraction. Fine. Let's see it. Let's see what new hell this is. I grabbed a knife from the block. I slit the tape with a single, sharp motion. I pried open the flaps. Inside, nestled in a bed of crumpled newspaper, was a book. My breath caught. My stomach dropped. I stumbled back, knocking a chair over. It crashed against the floor, but the sound was distant. All I could see was the book. It was old. Hardcover. The title was embossed in faded gold leaf on the dark blue cover. Ghosts of New York. I felt a scream building in my chest, a raw, animal noise. I clapped a hand over my mouth to hold it in. Not this book. Any book but this one. It was the book from his apartment, the one he'd used as a coaster for his coffee cup, the one that sat on the rickety desk next to the photos of his victims. This wasn't possible. Henderson was in jail, in a maximum security ward, Miller had said. He couldn't have sent this. He couldn't. So who the hell sent it? I circled the kitchen counter like it was a predator. My mind was a storm of panic and denial. A coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. It's a common book, right? An antique. Someone could have just... No, I knew. Down in my bones, and the part of me that now lived in constant, gnawing fear, I knew. This was not a coincidence. My hand, slick with sweat, reached out. I couldn't stop it. I had to know. I had to touch it, to prove it was real. My fingers grazed the worn cloth of the cover. It felt 100 years old. It felt like death. I snatched it out of the box. I was going to throw it, to smash it against the wall. But as I lifted it, it fell open. It wasn't empty. Something small and rectangular slid from between the pages, landing face down on the linoleum floor with a soft click. A photograph. I froze. I stared at the white square of its back. My heart was a drum solo against my ribs. Don't pick it up. Don't look. Throw the whole damn thing out. Burn it. Run. Get out of the city. Get out of the country. But I couldn't. It was like a magnet pulling me in. The choice was already made. I knelt down. The floor was cold against my knees. My fingers were numb as I pinched the edge of the photograph and turned it over. My breath left me in a rush. It wasn't a picture of me. It was a man. A man I'd never seen before, maybe in his early 30s. He had thinning hair and the kind of tired eyes that had seen too much. He was standing on a city street in front of a different apartment building, a brick 5-story with a green awning. He was holding up a set of keys, forcing a smile for the camera. It was the smile of someone trying to convince themselves they were happy, the smile of someone starting over. He looked lonely. He looked lost. He looked like me. I scrambled backwards, crab-walking until my back hit the kitchen cabinets. I couldn't breathe. This was a pattern, a cycle. Henderson wasn't just a killer. He was a collector. And this man in the picture, was one of them. Another urban lonely guy. Another target. But Henderson was locked up. So what was this? A trophy sent from a follower? A copycat? A warning? My eyes darted to the book, still lying open on the floor, then back to the photo clutched in my fist. My knuckles were white. The man in the picture smiled his sad, hopeful smile. He had no idea what was coming for him. The thought made me sick. Then I saw it. On the back of the photograph, there was writing. My hand trembled so badly I could barely read it. It wasn't the clumsy, angry scrawl I had seen on Henderson's notes. This was different. The letters were precise. Elegant. A flowing, almost delicate cursive written in black ink. A familiar handwriting. There were only 6 words. Help me warn him. E.M. E.M. The air solidified in my lungs. My vision swam. E.M. The name from the old newspaper clippings in Henderson's apartment. The woman in the wall. The silent, screaming face. The spirit who had given me that final, deliberate nod from the window. Eliza. Eliza Murray. The photo slipped from my fingers. I stared at my own empty hands. The whole world tilted on its axis. All this time, I thought she was a part of his evil. A trapped spirit he was tormenting, another one of his horrors. I was wrong, so wrong. She wasn't trying to scare me. She wasn't trying to drive me mad. The disappearing gifts, the quiet sounds, the frantic gestures. It was a language I hadn't understood. She was trying to warn me, screaming at me in the only way she could. I had it all backwards. Henderson wasn't the haunter. He was the cage. And she was the ghost rattling the bars, trying to get a message out. Now he was gone. But she wasn't. She was still trapped. Still watching. And her desperate mission wasn't over. I looked down at the photograph on the floor, at the face of the smiling, doomed man. He thought he was starting a new life. He didn't know he was just the next name on a list. A list that existed outside of Henderson, outside of that building. The game hadn't ended when I ran out onto the street. It had only changed players. She had chosen me. I wasn't a survivor. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a messenger. My terror, my nightmares, they weren't just a scar. They were a qualification. I picked up the photo again, my hand steady now. A horrible, cold calm washed over me. I stared into the eyes of the man, the next target, and I saw the next ghost. IB